The world of My Hero Academia is filled with incredible quirks, but because most of them aren't part of the main cast, they tend to get forgotten or underused. So for the last 4 months, I've been giving Deku quirk after quirk to see how our beloved crybaby would fare. And if I'm being real, I think today's quirk might be one of the strongest ones I've given him. So if you're going to enjoy the video or I managed to entertain you for a while with this hypothetical scenario, then consider leaving a like because it helps the video do so much better in the algorithm, and I can't tell you guys how much a like really means. So with that said, enjoy. We begin our story to the sound of screams being heard from the public. A villain had just used his quirk to transform into this gigantic pink, sludgy monster thing. I don't even know how I would describe it, but the point is, the second that this villain would transform, he would throw a car towards the direction of the police cruiser that had just stopped him for a mugging in progress. It's at this point that the car would be about to hit some civilians, and this is when suddenly the pro hero Xehther would arrive, shooting his flames at the car and causing it to blow up just before it could injure the civilians, landing nearby to use a fire flame fist against the villain. After this attack would land, the villain would go unconscious, as we would suddenly see a van from the nearby distance opening its doors to reveal 3 more villains. Out of nowhere, a little dude would rush towards the direction of the villain, trying to take pictures acting as though he was a photographer, and with Xehther screaming at him, "Get lost, civilian, this is pro hero business." The man would say, "I just love your work, Xehther," before then using his quirk called Solar Flare to completely blind Xehther and the surrounding people. They would go on to toss the man into their van and try to get away, driving extremely recklessly, all the while they would be doing this, as out of nowhere you would hear the sound of a howl and a man landing down on the ground using his quirk, Beast Mimicry, an ability that essentially enhances this dude's offensive capabilities to the max. He's kind of like that one dog dude that's in the My Hero Academia school system, you know, the guy that's always howling and growling, but way better. And so immediately stepping in front of the car that's already traveling at 80 miles an hour, mind you, this man proceeds to stand in front of it and grab the whole thing and throw it across literally the street. At this point, the man would go towards the vehicle and tell everybody that they're done for. The small miniature man would try to use the Solar Flare quirk, but using his enhanced senses thanks to the abilities of his quirk, the man would go on to take all of them down, with Xehther shortly arriving afterwards. Immediately, the fiery hero would go on to say, "Thanks for your help, Battle Beast, but I don't think I really needed it." To which we would then see cameras flashing all over Xehther, with him actually being the one to receive all the credit. This would leave Izuku's father, Hiyashi Midoriya, in a very pissed off mood, because that had been the second time that the media had confused his efforts for Xehther's. And so as the man would leave, he would glare at Xehther, thinking to himself that that's a garbage hero and he's much better, even stronger than he is. But the public will just have to wait to see on that. He would make his way home, and upon arriving, the man would enter the house where Inko would be inside with a newborn baby, his first child, Izuku Midoriya, with the boy having a bit of a strange appearance. See, the boy was born with the same horns that his father has at all times, but he had his mother's hair, having white grayish hair instead of his father's dirty blonde. The man would smile, ruffling Izuku's hair before telling Inko that he's hungry. Make something up. She would say that she actually already did, and waiting on the table would be a plate that the man would quickly scarf down. After this, he would make his way to the room, throw his belongings as far as he can, and take a 7-hour nap. And yes, I do mean nap, because this dude's normal sleeping hours could range from anywhere from 2 days to 3 days, all thanks to his beast quirk. So as the man would wake up, he would look at Inko, going on to tell her to do a good job raising that boy, that someday he's gonna make for a phenomenal hero, even stronger than he is, as he would look at the boy, seeing his horns, and smile, saying that after all, he unlocked his quirk. And seeing as that theory about quirks getting stronger every generation is turning out to be more and more true, he can't wait to see just how strong his boy will be. Who knows, maybe he'll be able to actually take a fight seriously when he's just in middle school. The man would have a little bit of an evil grin before walking off, and Inko would simply hold the young Izuku, saying that Izuku is gonna be just perfect. This is when we would fast forward about 4 years, and Izuku would now be in the quirk doctor's office, with the father and Inko inside there, as we would then hear a knock at the door, and a doctor would come inside, not Dr. Ujiko, who would go on to inform them that they have good news. Their son has an incredible quirk. The man would smile, saying, "Of course he does. He was born with my quirk." as the man would go on to tell him that that's actually not the case. The young boy was actually born with a different quirk. The man would raise an eyebrow at this, going, my son wasn't born with my quirk? As the doctor would go on to explain that the boy actually has his mother's quirk, with his appearance simply being a chip off the old block. The man would growl at this before saying that that's impossible. Those horns are something that it's innate to his quirk. He must have his abilities. But the doctors would say that as many tests as they ran, he didn't possess to have that. At first they had thought that it was some sort of hybrid, but no, the boy only possesses the ability to control wind. This in turn would piss off Hiyashi, who's staring at the direction of Izuku with eyes that could kill, would say, can't believe I was so hyped up on you. Looks like you're just a failure. As we would then see Izuku looking down, feeling horrible about his quirk, as he would look to his mom and then to his younger brother, who would crack a smile, trying to lift up the mood in the area, kind of sensing that something was going wrong. As Izuku would look at his brother, he would simply look back down, avoiding the gaze of his father, as they would leave the area, and the man had planned to do like a whole surprise thing and take his son out to celebrate, but after that, yeah, there was a no way. He was pretty disappointed that it wasn't his quirk that Izuku awakened. Kind of like a dad if he was to really want a boy, but then he gets a girl at the gender reveal party and then he's just depressed. That's kind of the reaction that we would get from Izuku's father, except times 100, because the dude is beast, and when he gets mad, trust me, he gets mad. Inko would go on to, tell Izuku that his quirk is wonderful, and even if his quirk doesn't go on to let him become a hero, he could do a lot of things still. With the reason that she would say this being because of the fact that her quirk that allows her to manipulate wind is pretty damn weak. And you know what? Izuku's actually is as well. But it's not going to be staying that way for long, because Inko's quirk was never meant to be weak. It was actually an incredibly overpowered quirk, which she never took the time to properly train, since Inko would have never aspired to be a hero or anything of that. In fact, she never even thought she would marry Izuku's father, but one thing led to another and the man just swept her off her feet after saving her. But even that was so long ago, since the man's changed a lot since then. His hero career hasn't exactly been going the way that he had imagined it, and instead of rising to become one of the greatest top 10 heroes, instead he finds himself stuck at 15th, not exactly finding himself too popular with the people, and this started to heavily affect his attitude, thanks to the fact that that beast quirk had started low-key taking over himself. So with that said, Izuku would grow up in a bit of a broken home. What do I mean a bit? A very broken home. The dude literally grows up in favoritism personified. Anytime Izuku wanted something and he asked his dad and he was like, Dad, can you get me this? I need it for school. He'd be like, go get it, go ask your mother, or get it yourself. You're old enough to work for it. But anytime his younger brother, who mind you, does actually have the same quirk as him, asked for anything, he was just the golden child. He always got everything he wanted, whenever he wanted, and there was no questions asked. In fact, when it came to even training, by the time that the boy turned 5 years old and Izuku was 6, his dad was already starting to train him to become a hero. And where was he left? Well, nowhere, because he had received absolutely zero training. Inko would try to help Izuku by training her in the best way that she knows possible, but it wouldn't exactly do too much, because Inko's wind control of her quirk essentially amounts to allowing her to shoot light breezes of wind and create these little mini wind tornadoes in her hand that, if she's lucky, would be able to pick up a couple of leaves. Which is why I hope you guys are now starting to kind of get the picture of the bad situation Izuku's left with. However, even throughout all that, Izuku has to admit one thing: he has a quirk, and that is a big advantage. So regardless of how weak it is, Izuku vows that he was going to make sure that his quirk became so powerful that his father would have no choice but to accept him. The young Izuku would begin training every single day, over and over and over again for hours on end, kind of similar to how Toyo was when he was learning to control his quirk. But obviously Izuku's not going to be having the backlash of the quirk not being suited to his body. It's literally perfectly suited. And so with that being the case, Izuku would make it grow stronger and stronger every day, eventually getting to the level of Inko in about a week thanks to his insistent work, and getting to the level where Izuku could create a breeze to actually move an entire person. This training would continue over and over the course of years, to the point where eventually Izuku was capable of forming vortexes of wind that were so incredibly fast they could literally cut people. The abilities that Izuku managed to create with his wind quirk were absolutely busted by the time that he even made it to middle school. Because I do mean it when I say, if Izuku truly wanted to, he probably could already become a pro hero. The dude is already incredibly powerful. And what's interesting about this is that Izuku would become this strong, never having told his father about that. Because as the years passed and Izuku grew stronger and stronger, trying to show his father, every single time that he would try to get him to watch his progress and see how much better he's doing, his dad would always ignore it, come up with an excuse, or say that he was busy. And Izuku was tired of it. If his father hadn't cared about him at all, in order to even spare 20 seconds of his life just to watch Izuku, he didn't need praise. He didn't even need to be told he was doing a good job or that he was proud of him. He just wanted his dad to be there. So, with his dad pretty much failing him after the fact that he was born without his quirk, Izuku had decided that he was just gonna have to crush his father in the hero rankings himself, and force his father to not only look at him, but look up at him. Because Izuku swore that if it was the last thing he did, he would become a top 10 pro hero and show his father just how easy it truly was. With the only two people that actually know how strong Izuku truly is being his younger brother, which Izuku doesn't actually have qualms with, and you would think by the way that I broke things down he would not like his brother because he's like jealous, but no, he loves his brother, and that's always been the case. His younger brother respects him and feels bad for his older brother, but Izuku's already explained that this is just how their life is, and if his dad wants to act like that, let him. Because at the end of the day, Inko had always favorited Izuku, and the dad had always favorited the younger brother. So it's not like Izuku was just completely left out of the picture. Whenever his dad wasn't around, their childhood was pretty average and normal. And so with that being the case, every day in middle school, the two brothers would arrive at the same school, with Izuku walking into the classroom and sitting down dropping his books. It's at this point that somebody would walk over towards Izuku, which would be Izuku's childhood friend, Maya, who actually also happens to be a hero in training with a quirk that's pretty interesting because it essentially allows her to create these really cool pink barriers, and she could even use those for mobility, sort of like a hamster ball. She still has yet to figure out how to actually make the barrier fly, but trust, she's gonna figure that out sometime soon. But anyways, as she would walk over towards Izuku, she would sit next to him asking how training was yesterday, to which Izuku would say that it was fine, it was fun, it was more of the same old, with her saying that his father wasn't around to check it out again, was he? He would nod, saying that no, he wasn't, but he doesn't care. He wouldn't care at all what the old man thinks of him anyways. She would look down, knowing that that couldn't be further from the truth, as she would then go on to ask Izuku what school he decided to go to. Her already knowing the answer, but simply asking just to, make some small talk with Deku. Deku would look towards her before saying that she already knows the answer. He's going to UA, since that's where All Might graduated from, and that was a school that his father actually wanted to go to once upon a time, but he ended up having to resort to a different hero school. Izuku would smirk at this point, as Maya would smile, saying, "There you go. There's the normal Izuku that I know and love." Izuku would look towards her before saying, yeah, whatever. Well, can we just sit down and do some class? And in case you guys haven't noticed, Izuku kind of has like a little bit of like a Bakugo-esque attitude. Not really Bakugo in the sense that he's a jerk, but kind of just like a loudmouth, like rough, like tough kind of kid. You get what I'm saying? So anyways, with that said, the school day would be over, and once that would be the case, Izuku and Maya would make their way towards an arcade, since Maya had convinced Izuku to finally take a rest day. You can't train all the time. Izuku would look at her being like, "Fine, I'll take 2 hours off of my training, but that's it," as Maya would smile, saying that he's the best. Afterwards, the two of them make their way towards the arcade, and once they're about to enter inside through a different entrance that they know the employees go in through, but Maya's older brother works there, so she's able to go in through there, suddenly the two would be met with a strange green bottle that would open and burst open, revealing the sludge villain to have actually been there. With the two of them seeing this villain pop up, since All Might in this timeline would still drop the water bottle. Don't ask me how, because I have no clue. I just wanted the sludge villain to be introduced here. So anyways, as the sludge villain would pop up out of the ground and Izuku and Maya would both look at this, they would both be sitting there just going like, what the heck? And as the sludge villain would come out, he would say, looks like that idiot managed to drop me. Give me your body, kid. The villain would scream as he would lunge towards the direction of Izuku, with Maya placing the both of them inside of a barrier. Izuku at this reaction would raise an eyebrow, looking to Maya, telling her to put this thing down, that he won't be able to use his quirk effectively if he's in here with her. And so Maya would start blushing, saying sorry, as she would pretty much create like a air hole where Izuku like plops right out of, and she's still stuck inside the barrier. Izuku would tell her to reinforce that thing, because if she doesn't, she's gonna fly away miles. And so Maya, you know, kind of closing her eyes, but like kind of like peeking a little bit because she wanted to see how cool Izuku was, would proceed to watch on as the sludge villain would say, "You're cocky, kid. You know, I was worried when she created that barrier. I thought I wasn't going to be able to get to you. But since you decided to make things so easy, I'll make sure it's not that painful. Trust me, it'll be over soon, kid." The sludge villain would rush towards the direction of Izuku, however, it couldn't touch him, because Izuku had created a very, very high wind pressure wind barrier. Or not like a barrier, but like an armor that serves as a barrier that surrounds his entire body, blowing wind so fast that the moment that the sludge villain got even close, that thing literally splattered on the wall, with the sludge villains like looking at Izuku and be like, "What the? How the heck did you do that? What kind of quirk is that anyways?" the sludge villain would ask, as Izuku would smirk towards its direction, telling it that it's the quirk that's gonna take him down. Before air would start compressing him from every angle, bottom, sides, it would pretty much crush him into a cube, and Izuku would go on to ask the sludge villain if he's gonna behave himself if he lets him go. The sludge villain would be stunned, his body being compressed into this cube-like shape, with it trying to beg and scream for its life, say, kid, I was just kidding. I was just trying to get away from All Might. Please, let me go." But as Izuku would hear it beg for itself, Izuku would have a bit of a creepy smile appear, Maya noticing it, and Izuku saying, "Nah, I don't think I will," as he would crush the sludge villain, knocking it out and causing it to splatter everywhere. Izuku in this moment would go on to just leave the sludge villain there at the scene, with him and Maya walking off. Eventually, about 2 minutes would pass, and Izuku would drop her off with her older brother, with him going on to say that that's enough of that because he has to get back to his training. He would apologize, saying that he has to go, and as Maya would give him like a pouty face trying to say that he needs to stay because their 2 hours aren't up, Izuku would say actually they are, pointing to the clock, to which Maya would scoff, saying, "Whatever, I guess I'll see you at school tomorrow, you jerk," as Izuku would walk off waving to Maya as he would arrive home shortly after. It's at this point that Izuku would say, "I'm home," with Inko yelling from the kitchen, "Good, sweetie, I'm glad you're here. I actually need your help. I was cooking dinner and I forgot to get the best ingredient. It's your favorite. You think you can run by the store and go grab it for me?" So Izuku, hearing this, would say, "Of course I can do that, Mom. Just let me know what you need." So she tells him the list, gives him some money, and Izuku says, "I'll be back in a jiffy." As we would see Izuku walking out the door, looking both ways before propelling himself into the air and flying off towards the distance in the direction of the store. It's at this moment that Izuku would hear an explosion, and from the distance, Izuku could see what was going on. That stupid sludge villain that he had just taken out earlier had gone and caused more trouble. Izuku had hoped that that thing would learn its lesson and maybe crawl back into the sewer where it came from, but no. And as Izuku would sit there flying, thinking to himself that he needs to go pick up that thing from the grocery store first, he would do just that, thinking that the heroes will handle it, or his dad will. Rolling his eyes. It's at this point that Izuku, buying the things that he needed, would then fly back over towards the incident, as it would have taken him about 2 minutes to do so, and looking towards the direction of where this was all taking place, Izuku would see that the sludge villain still wasn't handled. With multiple heroes on the scene, none of them even doing anything. Izuku, seeing this take place, would think to himself that just anybody could be a hero nowadays, as he would be about to fly off, thinking that the heroes will eventually handle it, when suddenly Izuku could hear the growls of his father within the sludge villain, and taking a double turn looking towards the direction of the hero that was actually already fighting it, Izuku would notice that his father was actually about to be taken over by that thing, with him getting pissed off that this villain had even dared to lay its hand on his dad. So, Izuku flying towards the direction of the sludge villain as fast as humanly possible, Izuku would land in front of it before telling it that he told it to get lost, then saying, "Tornado Vortex!" as from his hand, this gigantic tornado like spinning cyclone of air would hit the sludge villain, dispersing it everywhere. I mean it. Everywhere. Just as much as All Might would have done so in the original, that's exactly what would have happened. And just before the vortex could actually hit the building behind it, causing a lot of collateral damage, Izuku would cause the vortex to shoot up into the air, where it would quickly dissipate, literally changing the weather. Everybody watching this would be stunned, with Izuku now standing in front of his father, who was nearly unconscious, groggy from the situation, since he had been holding his breath for all of 2 minutes, thanks to, Izuku thinking that the heroes would handle it. And as Izuku would go over towards his father asking him how he was, his dad would stare back at him, smacking him away before telling Izuku that he didn't need his help, and he had that back there. And hearing this, Izuku would snap, saying, "The hell, old man? I just saved your life in front of all these people, and you still can't treat me like I'm your son? Go to hell, you bastard," before he would fly off, leaving everybody there with people having a bunch of questions. Did that kid just call that man dad? People would be shocked, saying, "What? There's no way, that's his son? His son handled the situation?" People start going over to him, asking him if he knew his son was that incredible, asking questions like, at what age did he develop his quirk? What is his quirk called? What's his name? What school is he going to? And the dad would growl, say, "Leave me alone," before jumping off and leaving all the reporters dumbfounded. It's at this point that Izuku, making his way home with the things that he had needed, Inko would finish cooking dinner, and Izuku's father would walk through the door, yelling out, "Izuku, come here right now!" Izuku, looking at his father, would ask him what he wants, as he would go on to tell him why he never told them that he had a quirk that freaking strong. Izuku would look at him, telling him that he tried, but his lame excuse of a father never gave him the time of day. His dad would look at him, growling before calming down and saying, "Alright, Izuku, what are the limitations of your quirk, and how does it work?" Izuku, hearing this from his father, would look at him, telling him to come with him. They would make their way towards Izuku's room or training area, as he would go on to show his father a couple applications of his quirk, going on to say that he got a lot of these ideas from different anime and shows that he had watched growing up. His father would say that that's stupid, that there's no way that he really got that strong by simply watching cartoons all day. And Izuku would tell him that of course he didn't. He took inspiration from that and tried every freaking combination he possibly could to make his attacks work or make sense. Izuku told him that it took years upon years of training, and his father would look at him, going on to tell him that maybe he isn't such a disappointment after all. Izuku, hearing this from his father, would say, "The hell you just say, old man? You mean to tell me after showing you all this and even saving you, you still gotta be such a hard ass on me?" As his dad would look at him, growl, and slam the door shut, walking away. Izuku would be stuck in the room, grabbing at his hair, practically tearing it out, going, "Damn it, old man, why do you gotta be such a jerk?" With Izuku's younger brother walking in the room and asking if his dad did it again. Izuku would say, "Did what again? Acted like he doesn't care that I exist? Yeah, he did that." And his younger brother would tell him maybe some training will get his mind off of it. He would look at his brother, telling him, "Yeah, maybe some training will. Why don't you go into your beast form and we can fight a few rounds." As his younger brother would say, "What? No way, man, I'm not gonna fight you. I already lose to you when you're not pissed off. I'm not about to get into the ring with you when you're in this state." And Izuku would look at his brother, going on to tell him that that's probably true. He would sit down, going on to tell his younger brother if he wants to go out and get some food. So the two of them would make a quick run to Kane's and make their way back home, as Izuku would once again do his training, with him continuing this process of getting home, training, being home, training, eating, training, until eventually 10 months would pass and we would finally now find ourselves with Izuku at the front gates of UA. And as Izuku would be dropped off by Inko, his younger brother from the backseat window would go on to tell Izuku good luck, as the boy would now stare at the gigantic school before him, walking inside before taking the written exam and eventually making his way outside. As Izuku would sit there waiting for the proctor to say begin, Izuku would be thinking about all the attacks and combinations that he could use in this moment, thinking to himself that he's about to shock everyone that every single year of training is about to show its fruits right now, and the moment that the test would begin, Izuku would immediately fly off towards the center of everything, with him using his wind quirk to cause every single robot in the vicinity, similar to what Inasa did with the balls. Y'all remember how this man proceeded to levitate everything and cause like 193 eliminations or something like that? That's what Izuku would do, but with the robots, levitating them into the air, every single one in his section, mind you. Izuku would then close his eyes as, channeling all of his quirk within his chest, he would proceed to then boom, like crush his hands, with the robots then being smashed as though they had been thrown into like some compost machine or something like that. Like, y'all know the junkyard where cars get smashed up into little like cubes? That's what Izuku did to the robots. So as all the robots would fall to the ground and the wind pressure in the entire area would have been like so like insane, like a hurricane, suddenly Principal Nezu would go on into the intercom saying, "Well, students, it appears that one of our students has taken out all of the robots. Everybody assigned to this section, make your way towards a different area." And as Izuku would hear that, he would go on to say that he apologizes. He just wanted to make sure UA knew exactly what they were getting into with him. And as Izuku would land, Izuku would make his way to leave. However, a 0-pointer would appear, and Izuku, turning around to see a gigantic robot standing there, would smile. Suddenly, Izuku would create a winged scythe in his hand, and slashing it at the air would proceed to send 3 perfect slashes, which actually resemble a beast's claw that is just going at it and just like slinging it, you know, kind of like Wolverine, would proceed to destroy that thing in 3 different spots, causing a massive explosion to go off. After this, Izuku would look towards the cameras that are monitoring him, asking if they've got any more of those robots, saying that it's been a while since he's been able to let loose, and that nothing would be said. Izuku would simply roll his eyes before walking off, saying that this test was too damn easy. And as he would be about to leave, suddenly he would be greeted by a tiny little mouse. Izuku would stare at it, asking, "And who the hell are you?" With the Principal Nezu saying, "My name is Nezu, and I just so happen to be the principal at this academia." With Izuku saying, "What? You're the principal? But you're a mouse. How does that even work?" "I'm a mouse, a bear, whatever you want, but I am the principal," Nezu would say, as we would see the dumbfounded Izuku just staring at Nezu in complete confusion, as Nezu would go on to tell him that he is thrilled to have a student like him at UA, saying that he was a bit shocked when he looked into Izuku's files and noticed who his father was, before then breaking out into a tangent about how awesome it is that Izuku inherited his mother's quirk and became even more powerful than his father, who happens to be the number 19 hero Battle Beast. Izuku, hearing this, would just have this look of just like shut up on his face, with Nezu taking note of this and saying that he will just get to the point. After this, Nezu would go on to explain that his entrance into the school is already secured, but he has an offer for Izuku that he hopes he doesn't refuse, going on to say that he would like to sponsor Izuku to a program that he's actually been working on called the Mini Hero Program, which essentially functions just as it sounds. Students, particularly high schoolers with exceptional abilities, will be allowed to partake in a provisional hero licensing exam early, allowing them to partake in a lot of hero activities that otherwise most other students would only dream of having the opportunity of. It essentially supercharges their pro hero career, and the moment that Izuku hears that this will get him to become a hero even faster, meaning that he can surpass his father on the hero charts, Izuku would immediately look at Nezu with the face of, "Where do I sign?" Nezu would stare at Izuku, going on to say that great, that the test consists of, but Izuku just cuts him off, saying that he doesn't need to hear all that. He will accept this because it's the fastest way to surpass his father on the charts. And Nezu, hearing this, would raise an eyebrow, wondering what exactly is this boy's relationship with his father. However, he would simply agree, going on to tell Izuku that he would like to meet him here the very next day. And so, we would then jump cut to Izuku making his way home, throwing his backpack on the ground, and hanging his jacket on the little coat hanger thing, as he would go on to yell, "Mom, I'm home," to which Inko would say, "Oh, Izuku, you're finally home. What took you so long?" expecting Izuku to have finished that test way faster. But when Izuku would go on to inform her of what had actually taken place, with Principal Nezu instantly accepting him into UA and even wanting to sponsor him into a program called the Mini Hero Program, Inko would be over the moon excited, saying that she's so proud of her son, taking a quirk like hers and making it something incredible, as Izuku's younger younger brother, who hearing it thanks to his beast quirk that he has like his father's, would go running to the other room, horns out with like a little bit of like fluffy hair on him because, you know, he has a little bit more of that like animalistic appearance, being like, bro, you got in and you even got into this program, dude, you are the man. Like he just proceeds to like dap up his brother with like a double high five, with Izuku looking at him and telling him that he knows it, going on to explain that pretty soon he's going to become the #1 hero, saying that a bit loud. Izuku's father, hearing Izuku say that, would simply just ignore it, as he eventually walks into the kitchen once Izuku goes to his room to rest, and we would then see him yell at Inko, be like, hey woman, make me some food. As we would see Inko staring at Ieyashi and going, okay. She then whips him up a big old feast, and after he eats it, the dude knocks out for like 3 days. Although while the next day, we jump cut to Izuku making his way to the location of the actual provisional licensing exam, which essentially is going to consist of going head to head with a pro hero, in this case Gang Orca, saving civilians from a fake incident, just like they would have in the original provisional hero license, but this time it's real, and the civilians that he's saving are heroes, so they could straight up like get injured if he doesn't pull this off from a burning building. And lastly, the final test would actually be participating in like pretty much like taking down an actual villain with pro hero supervision, which in this case the pro supervising him would be Mount Lady. So let's go ahead and cover how that would take place. The moment that Izuku would enter, he would look inside of a massive facility, and seeing this, he would then go on to see that Gang Orca was standing in the middle of everything, Mount Lady being present, and a couple of small time heroes, as well as, you know, some people working with the actual event. So with Deku walking closer towards the direction of the heroes, Izuku would kind of give like a little bit of a head nod to Gang Orca before standing in front of all of them, and Principal Nezu appearing off of Izuku's back. The principal would then go on to explain that this is Izuku Midoriya, saying that he has a phenomenal quirk and that he's the student that he believes will be the first to participate in the mini pro program. And so Gang Orca, hearing that, would ask Izuku if he truly believes himself to be ready to partake such a difficult test like this. Izuku would say that he's game for whatever, and Gang Orca would say that he hopes so, as everybody would leave the area, and we would just kind of watch Mount Lady from the sides going, why are we even doing this? I can't believe that you guys made me take time off of my hero work just so I could supervise some brat. But the moment that Izuku would hear that, he would whisper under his breath, oh, I'll show you who's a brat, with Gang Orca hearing that thanks to his super crazy hearing that his quirk gives him access to. Gang Orca would ask Izuku if he's ready, and Izuku would tell him ready as he'll ever be, as we would then see Gang Orca shooting a supersonic attack towards Izuku, which Izuku would dodge by creating wind armor that completely nullifies the effects of the sound, drowning everything out. Gang Orca would be stunned, saying that that is incredible, but all of a sudden, he would start to feel as though there was a level 10 hurricane in the area, and he was unable to even keep his eyes open. And as Izuku would simply walk through the air that was starting to literally leave cuts and gashes on Gang Orca, Izuku would ask if he's impressed yet, with Gang Orca saying, don't underestimate a pro, then going on to throw another attack towards the direction of Izuku, which would actually do damage to Gang Orca. Him getting even close to Izuku, to his little like wind armor attack, literally sends him flying back and destroys his hand. Like the pressurized air was actually insane when he made contact with it. And with him now finding himself on the ground, with Izuku walking closer and closer towards him, Gang Orca would start to understand why it was that Principal Nezu entered this kid. So he would simply nod, saying that he concedes, as the air would immediately stop and Mount Lady's hair would be a complete mess, with the heroes watching on that were partaking in this just being like, who is this kid? With Mount Lady thinking, this kid's a gold mine. If I can get him to be my sidekick or even join my agency, it'll be the talk of the town. Cha-ching, she would think, as she would stare at Izuku, now having a completely different tune for the kid. Thinking that what she'll do is put on that feminine charm and get Izuku to join her immediately, she would walk down there telling Izuku that he was incredible, you know, doing like a whole like girly pose in front of him, with Izuku staring at her and saying that he doesn't like her. Mount Lady would be like, what? As Izuku would stare at her, saying that he's the kind of hero that he hates most. Not to mention, she's the type of woman that he would rather avoid. Mount Lady hearing that would feel crushed, hearing a little 16-year-old, or 14 I think actually, literally telling her that she is a promiscuous woman pretty much, right? As Izuku then goes on to be told what the next event was, essentially being told to save civilians from a burning building, as we would immediately see Izuku standing in front of it, closing his eyes, breathing in, and then proceeding to manipulate wind currents to not only put out the fire, but to keep the place steady. Because if Izuku was to have just used his wind to blow out the fire, that would have completely destroyed the foundations of the area. But thanks to the fact that he was using the currents to do two separate things, the place stayed completely afloat, all the while everybody had enough time to literally be floated up by the wind that Izuku was controlling every single one simultaneously, float them out, let them land safely, and then let the building collapse behind them. With Izuku asking, how's that? Everybody watching this would say, he's a prodigy, as Izuku would stand there asking what's next. This is when Mount Lady would be like, I've got to get this kid into my agency. And so we would then jump cut to her and Izuku walking through the town, her going on to explain that being a hero isn't actually all it's cracked up to be, saying that there's a lot that actually goes into it. Paperwork, friendly competition, and hero rankings, saying that most heroes can't even consider this their full-time gig, since it's extremely hard to even break into the top 100, and that's where the real money's at. Izuku hearing that would say that he's not interested in something as superficial as money, as she would then think, what? She would look at him and say, what do you mean you're not interested in money, kid? What kind of hero are you trying to be? Izuku would say the kind of hero that can crush my dad. And she's like, right, your father's battle beast, he's the best. But Izuku hearing that is just like, he's the worst. With her being like, damn, I just keep messing up. She would be getting annoyed. And it's in this moment that Izuku could see like the sounds of a bank going off that they had just crossed by. Izuku hearing this and recognizing that this is the perfect opportunity to not only save a couple of people, help the bank, but get rid of Mount Lady since she won't have to supervise him once he completes this test. So with Izuku immediately snapping into action and using his wind to fly over there as fast as possible, we would then go on to see Izuku looking around, assessing the situation quickly, noticing that there was a hole in the ground due to the villain that had actually done this having a mole quirk, which essentially allowed him to dig into the ground, steal the money from the vault, and get away scot-free. However, this villain made a mistake. He did it when Izuku was around. So with Izuku cutting off the air oxygen that was down there in the mole, in the little villain's path that he was digging, the mole literally proceeded to dig straight up and be like, and the moment that happened, Izuku proceeded to slam down like a wind hammer, a literal wind hammer, like he conjured it, smashing the mole dude on the head, who just looked like a really ugly, like short dude with these like little buck-tooth teeth, kind of like how Bugs Bunny looks, and then grabbing the big old bundle of cash that he was carrying and telling the bank that he believes this is theirs. After this would be done, Izuku would then turn in the criminal, and Mount Lady watching this would be like, he's really that guy. As Izuku would go on to tell Mount Lady that he's thankful for her help, but he doesn't really think he's going to be joining her agency or becoming a sidekick anytime soon. As Mount Lady would just be left there dumbfounded, all the while Izuku would walk off, getting a message notifying him that he was going to be receiving his license in the mail in about 2 weeks, give or take, seeing as the paperwork has to go through. So eventually the day would come for Izuku's first day of school, and with this coming around, we would see Izuku waking up to the smell of a delicious breakfast. Everybody would be at the table, with Inko saying that she wanted for everybody to be here for Izuku's big first day. Izuku's father would say that he doesn't see what the big deal is, it's not like he's become a hero yet, but Izuku would simply be thinking to himself that it's only a matter of time now, Dad. Before he would leave, his father would say, don't screw this up, you better go out there and make my name proud. As Izuku, hearing his father's remark, would say, I will, Dad. As we would then pretty much then see Izuku making his way into the UA doors, getting help from a couple of upperclassmen since he had no idea where to go, only to then be greeted by Ida, who would have his hand in Bakugo's face saying, you should not be sitting like that, as Izuku would just ignore everything that was going on around him, sitting down in the class, knowing that class was about to start soon and recognizing that that man there in the sleeping bag was Aizawa. So Izuku would go on to sit down as the sound of muttering would begin, and his classmates would start talking amongst themselves saying, wait, I think that's him. He's the guy who destroyed all the robots. Wasn't he near an exam section? Ida would finally stop yelling at Bakugo, looking at Izuku as he would say, it's him. And Todoroki in the back himself would even be thinking to himself who the heck this guy is. As he would then go on to hear the mutters of his classmates saying that he's the one who destroyed 200 robots at the exam section, with some even saying that yeah, rumor has it he even destroyed the zero pointer. As we then just kind of see Todoroki thinking to himself that that's not a big deal, he could destroy zero pointers too, but he has to admit 200 robots is a bit impressive. So now pretty much, taking a interest in Izuku, everybody would then finally be told to make their way outside, with Izuku changing in the dressing room, showing off some very Battle Beast Sun type features. The dude is ripped. The picture that I have for the thumbnail low-key doesn't do it justice because you guys can't see the physique that Izuku's actually rocking, but the man is, he's kind of him to say the least. Anyways, Aizawa, once this would happen, would go on to toss the ball towards Izuku, telling him that for this test, all he needs to do is throw that ball as far as he can, and so long as he stays within the confines of that circle, he can do whatever he wants with his quirk. Everybody hearing this would be like, what? We get to use our quirks? To which Aizawa would go on to explain to them why that is, telling Izuku to use it already. Izuku in this moment would go on to create a gigantic kaiju form of himself as he would grab onto the ball, rotating its arms 360 degrees countless times before letting it go like it was a freaking shot put, as he would send this thing flying 2,414,000 miles in distance with a couple of meters sprinkled in there. This would shock the class, as Aizawa would even be stunned himself, saying that he'd never seen a record like that. With Aizawa just thinking to himself that that must be why Izuku's part of the mini pro hero program. The dude is actually insane. He would watch Izuku closely as the rest of the events would take place, consisting of the 50-meter dash, which Izuku would absolutely blitz, but not too fast, considering that with Izuku's wind quirk, it actually takes a bit of time for him to rack up crazy speed. Then we have the grip strength test, Izuku using his actual strength to get a pretty impressive number, however, not being satisfied by the fact that one of his classmates had actually gotten a little better, Izuku uses his wind quirk to amplify it and completely crush the machine. After this would come the standing long jump, which Izuku would clear the entire box, and then would come the repeated side-to-side steps, with Izuku using the wind current to push him back and forth so many freaking times he starts to literally make mirages. With the class all just staring at Izuku in complete awe. He can do all that with the wind quirk? Kaminari would say, as we would then see Mineta say, yeah, that thing. I can't believe that there's somebody out there who can do all of this. As we would probably get a classic anime scene of Aizawa just being like, I see, so this is his power? Nah, I'm totally kidding, but he would probably just be thinking to himself that that's the power of the number 19 hero battle beast? It's incredible. As we would then jump cut to the last 3 tests, which would probably be push-ups, sit-ups, and toe touches, with Izuku doing pretty well during all of those. And with that all being said, as Izuku would be doing some stretches after finishing the last set, people would go over towards him saying that he is incredible, with people singing his praises and Izuku starting to smile, until suddenly Katsuki Bakugo would go over to him saying, hey, don't let these damn extras over here make you have a big head. You're still not the best in this classroom, you got it? That title goes to me. As Todoroki would walk over towards Izuku, telling him that he's going to be making for a pretty good rival in his time here, telling Izuku that he looks forward to going head to head with him in this classroom. Izuku would nod, looking at Todoroki, realizing that yeah, that guy, he's pretty strong. As the day would eventually end, and with Izuku looking around to make sure nobody was there, Izuku would then go on to use his quirk to fly home. However, before it would activate, his homeroom teacher Aizawa would be standing behind Izuku, deactivating his quirk and telling him that Principal Nezu would actually like to have a word with him. This is when Izuku would raise an eyebrow at this, and realizing what his teacher had just done, he would connect the dots, realizing that his homeroom teacher just so happened to be Eraserhead. Literally probably one of the only people in the world who would fall under the category of a hard counter for him. So, as Izuku would make his way to Nezu's office, he would sit down as there would be a very frail blonde-haired man sitting there who would then buff up, revealing himself to be All Might. Then going on to explain what his reasoning is for being here, how he pretty much is looking for a successor, and he believes that Izuku Midoriya is that successor. Izuku hearing this would tell All Might that he's flattered, but honestly, he wants to become a hero using his own strength. He didn't spend countless hours every single day day before and after school training just so he could take the #1 hero's quirk and rise to the top that way. He wants to make sure all of his hard work meant something. So All Might hearing this and respecting Izuku's, decision, he would go on to tell Izuku that he's proud of him, and that although he's disappointed that he doesn't become his successor, he will be looking forward to seeing everything that Izuku accomplishes. But Izuku then staring at him would say that that's not actually all he had to say. If he's still looking for a successor, he might actually have someone in mind. Though he might be a bit younger than him, he might still have that heroic heart he's searching for. And All Might, raising an eyebrow at this, would then be taken to the Midoriya household. All Might entering the room and being greeted by Battle Beast, who just starts like roaring, be like, "What are you doing here, All Might?" All the while Izuku would get in the middle of them saying, "Chill, Dad, I brought him over here so we could meet Katsuya." And Izuku's father would be like, "Get lost, All Might, I don't want you in my house." All the while All Might would just kind of be sitting there and be like, "Nice to see you too, Battle Beast." After this would take place, Izuku, now showing All Might his brother Katsuya, who has an exceptional quirk and is actually pretty strong himself, would go on to say that this is the person that he wanted to meet and who he believes could be the successor of One for All. He goes on to tell All Might that while his brother might not look like much, he's an exceptional person, and Katsuya would be like, "Hey, that's rude," as Izuku would tell him, "Shut up," going on to explain to him that they need to spar now to show All Might just how strong he is. So Katsuya going into his Battle Beast form, transforming, like growing larger, his claws extending and all this stuff, he would look at his brother telling him that he's going all out. He would leap from one side of the wall to the next before then rushing towards Izuku and trying to stab him. However, before his hand would fully connect with Izuku, the wind would send him backwards, with All Might being shocked at how close his brother had actually managed to get to him, nearly actually breaking through the wind barrier, since that was something that his brother had had to go against for years since Izuku had finally discovered that move when he was 8. So with All Might watching this and seeing that he was young enough to actually train into like a next big thing, he would go on to like pretty much say that he would actually accept that offer, but only if Battle Beast is okay with that. As we would then hear screams from Battle Beast saying, "Give him the quirk already! I can't wait for my son to become even stronger than All Might. I knew my son would one day become powerful enough to become the #1 hero, and I was right to choose you, son." Patting Katsuya's hair, as Izuku would stare at his dad, just rolling his eyes saying, "Whatever." This is when Izuku would begin to wait for what All Might's response would be, and All Might would rip out a little piece of hair, offering it to his brother going, "Eat this," with Izuku and Katsuya both being like, "What? All Might, if you came here to joke, this is not funny." But All Might would say, "No, it's real. You have to ingest some of my DNA in order for the quirk to transfer. Look, I know it's weird, but this is just how it works." So Izuku hearing this from All Might would then be like, oh, sorry, All Might. Well, Katsuya, bottoms up, as he would put this in a drink and just drink down like a cup of water. After this would happen, he would like start clenching his hands and being like, "I don't really feel different." To which All Might would reply by telling him that he's not supposed to feel different, since the quirk actually takes a little bit of time to transfer, which is interesting because if you guys have actually seen the movie, I believe it was Two Heroes or Heroes Rising or something like that, Izuku had transferred his quirk to Bakugo and it was literally instantaneous. Maybe it was because like they did it via blood and they like both touched it, so it instantly went into his like system. I don't know, but the point is All Might would go on to tell him that tomorrow he would like to meet both boys at Dagoma Beach after each of their schools respectively, and Izuku looking towards his brother would say that he's game, as the very next day would roll around, and in the morning, his brother could feel the power, since after all, he had been born with a quirk that essentially causes him to transform into like a bigger, buffer, like animalistic state, just like his father. So when he does this, he becomes 2 times bigger, claws even sharper, and he just feels his muscles just bulging with energy. The One for All transference system worked like a charm in this instance, and as Izuku would stare at his younger brother, he couldn't help but smiling, with Izuku's father rushing in the room and saying, "I'm so proud of you, son. You are my greatest accomplishment in life," like just straight up in front of Izuku, just like completely acting like his son, who, mind you, was the whole reason this happened, and literally is part of the mini pro hero program, and is like the greatest thing ever since like All Might came around, is right there. But I digress. Point is, after this would take place, Izuku would tell his brother he'll meet him at the beach later, with Battle be saying that he might just actually drop by too. Izuku would roll his eyes, saying that he doesn't want his dad to be there, and his dad would simply growl at him, telling him that he'll be where he wants, that he's the man of the house. As we would then jump cut to Izuku in the classroom, him being pissed off since the morning and last night didn't exactly go as he had planned. And with All Might coming into the room being like, I am here, Izuku would be like, oh, All Might, at least something good's happening, before then realizing, wait, All Might? Going on to understand that he's actually one of his homeroom teachers. Izuku would be shocked, not having expected this, since because even though he is technically being sponsored by Nezu, it's not like he's in contact with Nezu 24/7 or is asking things like, who's gonna be the teacher or what are we gonna do in class today? Izuku doesn't care. He just kind of likes living life on the fly and just having things happen spontaneously, which in my opinion is the best way to live life. But anyways, with All Might arriving, he would go on to explain what's gonna be happening today and that their classroom is gonna consist of the battle trial arc, which for today's occasion, I'm gonna be using a random generator to use 2 random names and his teammates. So let me go do that real quick. All right. So we got his teammate being Yuga Aoyama, which honestly, when I got that pick, I was like, really? Him? And his opponents are going to be Dark Shadow or Tokiyami and Mineta, which I just thought of the funniest interaction that could happen. So I'm excited to cover this. All right, the event would immediately take place with Izuku picking his teammate and then the 2 random balls being picked for who he's going up against. Bakugo, noticing in this timeline that he wasn't facing off against either Todoroki or Izuku, would be pretty annoyed, screaming, going, let me try again, damn it, I didn't get the right ball, as we would then have All Might telling him that he has to sit back down and everyone else has to pick. And with that happening, what would take place after this is that we would see Izuku introducing himself to Aoyama, extending a hand, to which the boy would then be like, glitter, or no, not glitter, wait, what is Aoyama's like little catchphrase? It's like shine or glamour? Dude, I actually don't, wait, no, it's twinkle. The dude would be like, I can't stop twinkling. And Izuku staring at his teammate would be like, yeah, man, so anyways, just stay behind me and we'll pass. Just giving Aoyama this look of like, bro, who are you? As we then have him step into the room, which luckily for Tokiyami, seeing as his quirk is actually empowered by darkness, he would actually find that this might just benefit his team. But the moment that the test would begin, Izuku would go on to float to the top and fly around, looking inside of every window to see what room it was exactly that his opponents were inside of. Suddenly, Tokiyami, noticing that Izuku was actually outside of their window and about to enter, would shoot Dark Shadow towards him, trying to attack Izuku. However, Izuku, with one swift moment, by pretty much just flicking his finger, he would cut Tokiyami's Dark Shadow in half, sending it retreating into him immediately, with Tokiyami being shocked and Mineta watching as Izuku would rush into the building, him starting to throw his little like balls that he has on his head towards Izuku, being like, stay away you! Don't come any closer, I'm warning you! As we would then see the boy literally piss his pants, all the while Izuku would fly right past the 2 of them, like sending them both flying at separate directions of the wall with his wind quirk and then touching the bomb. As we would then hear All Might go, hero team wins, with Yuga just being like, twinkle, you know, like acting as though he had just done something. After this would happen, everybody would start singing his praises, with Aoyama being like, but didn't you see that I was the star of the show? He'd probably do something like that. But anyways, with that being the case, the school day would end, and with Izuku showing just how efficient and how like literally awesome he is with his quirk, the classroom would all solidify the fact that the 3 strongest are definitely Deku, Todoroki, and Bakugo might just be on their level. Bakugo hearing this would definitely get pissed off, with everybody finally ending the day, going home, and Izuku and Katsuya making their way towards the direction of Deguma Beach. Oh, and for those of you guys that actually recognize the reference that I'm making with the name Katsuya, you guys are real ones. Anyways, that said, what takes place here is that Izuku would be walking down the little like slippery slope with his brother, kind of like crushing his head, being like, yeah, like attaboy, like you better impress All Might today, with his brother being like you're the best, dude, like I can't believe you denied the quirk just to give it to me, with Izuku being like, yeah, I definitely did it for that reason. As the 2 would finally arrive to All Might, and he would say, well, shall we get started? To which Katsuya would reply, yeah, let's get on that, All Might. Immediately, All Might would go on to explain to him that the first thing that he would like them to do is to figure out just how much of the quirk he can actually use, going on to explain that the quirk of One for All is a very powerful quirk in and of itself, explaining the steps to use it, with him going on to tell him that he's actually already used it in the morning. All Might would stare at him saying, you did? And you managed to stay in one piece? To which Katsuya would say, yeah, why wouldn't I? As All Might would go on to explain that the power of One for All to any normal human who just activated all willy-nilly literally has the potential to just destroy them from the inside out. And Katsuya hearing this would say that it must be because he's just tough as nails. Izuku would say, I'll say, this dude's freaking body grew 2 times its normal size, and he got crazy buff. The dude looked like he started taking Tren or something. As All Might hearing that would laugh, then going on to be curious as he would stare at Katsuya asking how exactly that works, asking him to power up into it. And so we would see Katsuya closing his eyes before his transformation would begin, and we would start watching his hair elongate, nails grow, and teeth sharpen. All Might seeing this would get what Izuku was talking about, saying that he looked nothing like this yesterday, but admitting that due to this appearance, he'll probably be terrifying quite a few villains. And Izuku looking at him would say, you think? He had me scared and I'm his big brother. To which All Might would laugh, going on to pretty much clasp his hands together, like the fist in his hand, like doing the, the thing that most anime characters do, before then kind of just looking at Katsuya and asking him to go for a spar, saying that it's been a while since he's been able to let loose on someone, going on to say that 20 seconds should do. And so, Katsuya staring at All Might's direction would ask if he's truly ready for this, to which All Might would smile, telling him to go for it. And so, Katsuya lunging towards him, literally like leaving a little hole imprint where the sand was where his foot was before, he would throw a punch so powerful that the trash in the area of Dagoma Beach would be sent flying backwards. And All Might, who would tank that with both of his arms in front of him, would be feeling the pain, extending his arm and starting to shake it with a smile, saying that he's strong. At this point, Katsuya would say, that's nothing, before going on to throw a slash with his claws, which All Might would narrowly manage to evade, some of his hair having been chipped off, before All Might would then go on to throw a smash Texas blow straight to the direction of Katsuya's stomach. He would tank the blow being sent into some rubble, with the impact of the collision sending a bunch of debris into the air. Izuku stopping it before it can hit anybody, before him realizing that this area is disgusting, he proceeding to use his wind quirk would cause the air around the area to start literally smashing all of the debris into these little cubes, which in turn Izuku would then float into the air, smashing together once more, creating this gigantic ball of just trash. With All Might and Katsuya stopping for a second, looking up to see that thing that's literally casting a shadow on them and being like, dude, that quirk will never stop being cool. With Izuku yelling back, shut up and get your head back in the fight. And so Katsuya, looking back at All Might, would say, sorry, as he would then go and throw a punch towards the direction of All Might, showing off that, that little sibling energy of like, oh, like you're low-key scared of your older brother. And so with All Might then throwing his own punch, Katsuya and All Might's strength would both start to clash, with Katsuya asking the old man if he's ready for him to go full throttle. All Might would tell him that wait, but before he can, he would send All Might crashing into the ocean, into the waves, with All Might coming out shortly after, seaweed covering his head completely wet from head to toe. Katsuya would quickly apologize to All Might, with All Might being like, I never expected you would be that strong. As Katsuya in that moment hadn't even used like 50% of the quirk yet. He was at 40% when he threw that blow at All Might, and just look at what he had done to the previous symbol of peace. And it gets even crazier when you start to think about the fact that Katsuya is only literally 13 years old, meaning that his transformed beast form, much like his usual form, is still going through puberty, which means that when he turns into a full-scale adult, not only will his terrifying form get even bigger, but even stronger as well. I can't even imagine how strong this dude would be when he reaches his physical prime, but that's besides the point. Thing that I'm trying to get to now is that with Izuku watching that battle, he would clap it up for his brother, saying that he is very strong, and he would go on to ask him if he's down to spar. Katsuya, looking at his brother, would ask if he's sure, saying that he doesn't exactly feel like hurting his brother in case he can't control his power. But Izuku, hearing that, would laugh, scoffing, saying that there's no way that he's going to be able to hurt him in that state. To which Katsuya, hearing this, would take up on that challenge and say, alright then, just don't take it too hard when little brother finally gets stronger than the big one. As suddenly, he would rush at Izuku, throwing a punch at 40% power just like he did before, as internally we would hear Katsuya thinking to himself that finally his blows are gonna land on Izuku. However, just as it was about to smash through Izuku's wind barrier that he usually keeps up when facing him, he would be sent flying away as the area itself would start to have like the sand start picking up around Izuku, as he would say, "What? You didn't think I was always using a max power barrier on you, did you?" To which Katsuya, who in this moment is already finding it difficult to stand up, would look at his brother and just think, "You're incredible." Before then thinking that he can't think like that. Right now, he's trying to beat him. So, charging up his strength and getting even more big in his little like beast transformation state, he would now have access to 70% of One For All, due to the fact that the musculature state that his body goes into when he's transformed is nearly a perfect complement to the quirk of One For All. Granted, because he does have a quirk, he's not going to gain access to the other quirks because his cup is already full, but still, just having this beast quirk with One For All is definitely going to make him, if not top 3, definitely top 5 in the verse. So, continuing his charge up, he would then lunge towards the direction of Izuku as he would throw a full power blow at the barrier, nearly breaking through and almost about to get to Izuku before his hand literally starts to feel like it's getting shredded. Izuku would have upped the power of the barrier even more, sending this man crashing, with the ocean itself starting to literally get affected by the wind pressure Izuku was created. However, Katsuya getting back up and now going full berserk mode would lunge towards Izuku, sending a max output punch towards the direction of Izuku, trying to shatter the barrier. And as it would start to do some damage to it, Izuku would smirk, with the tornado rising right underneath his brother, destroying him completely. The wind would be so powerful, going like 700 miles an hour in speed, and it's just tearing into his fur, into even his horn, leaving the boy completely knocked out, with Izuku realizing what he had just done in that moment, and his horns that had grown from him using that much power shrinking back to their usual. Since in that moment of combat, Izuku's berserker state that he never knew his quirk actually granted him access to would have just started slipping through the tiny cracks that had formed, and now rushing towards his younger brother, shaking him, going, "Katsuya! Katsuya, wake up! Damn it, Katsuya, wake up!" His brother would finally wake up about 5 minutes later, after All Might would advise him to just give him some air, and that he'll give a call to Recovery Girl if he doesn't wake up in a minute or two. The time would pass, and Katsuya would finally wake up, with Izuku looking at his brother and saying, "Dude, you nearly gave me a freaking heart attack!" His brother staring back at him and saying, "I mean, what? What do you want me to do about it? You're the one who freaking went crazy with your quirk. How the heck was I supposed to know that you had that much firepower still in the tank?" Izuku, hearing that, then remembers that, yeah, he was kind of the one that took things too far, and would go on to apologize, rubbing the back of his hair, saying that since he never gets the chance to go all out against people, the first time he got to, he guesses he let it get the better of him this time. He would promise that the next time they fight, he'll take it easier on his brother, with Katsuya saying, "No way, dude, I'm done fighting you. I'm little brother for a reason. I don't feel like ending up in the hospital next time." And then, holding on to some of the wounds and cuts and gashes he left him, Katsuya would weakly stand up, saying that, yeah, he's gonna go home. All Might would say that Recovery Girl's actually already on her way, and that he should wait for that to happen. And Izuku, now, finally having this whole thing finished and having a laugh at the whole situation, would then check up on his phone, then seeing that he has 7 missed calls from a specific somebody, with Izuku reading the name. Crap. Izuku in this moment would turn back towards Katsuya and All Might, saying, "All Might, think you can take my brother home? Thank you, bye," before flying off towards the direction of the mall where he was actually supposed to meet Maya at an hour ago. She would be sitting there very upset, eating a little pretzel from Wetzel's Pretzels, as Izuku landing in front of her, everybody noticing that a kid literally just flew in, would then be like, "Whoa, what quirk does he have?" To which Izuku, looking at Maya, would say, "Maya, I am so sorry. I thought that the training I was gonna do with my brother was gonna take less time, but I let it get out of hand." Maya, though, just kind of looks away and is like, "Huh, yeah, sure, just forget your friends. Why don't ya? It's always about training with ya. Can't you ever just take a day for me?" Realizing what she had just said and be like, "I mean, to hang out?" As Izuku, hearing that, would just be like, "Maya, look, I promise, how about this? This week, we'll hang out 3 times after school." And she's like, "Make it 4. But not this week. I'm a little busy with school. Izuku hearing that would say, oh right, speaking of school, how's that been treating you? Since Maya has actually been going to a different school. And truth be told, I low-key completely forgot that I introduced her in part 1, so that's why she had no involvement in the story for part 2. But anyways, jumping back into what she was gonna say, she would pretty much go on to tell Izuku that honestly it was a bit hard for her when she got her rejection letter from UA, but truth be told, she's pretty happy at her new school, going on to explain to Deku that she's actually found somebody that's kind of similar to him. Izuku hearing this would say, so what, you got a new crush all of a sudden? And she would say, no, wait, what? Crush? I don't know what you're talking about. To which she would then go on to say that it's not like that and that she means somebody with a wind quirk, that he's extremely impressive and very strong. She would go on to say that she has no idea why he didn't just stay at UA considering that's the school he applied for, that she found out that apparently she got in through recommendations and even got an acceptance letter but rejected it because of some kid with half and half hair. Izuku hearing that would think, Todoroki? What could have caused somebody to leave the school just because of Todoroki? But putting that in the back of his mind, he would go on to explain that yeah, UA's been pretty cool, going on to apologize again for that failed little test that they have, saying that, well yeah, the test technically would work a lot for offensive powered quirks, but for defensive powered quirks and support heroes like what he believes she can be, probably not so much. She would say it's a shame, but she would look at Izuku saying that it doesn't matter because they're gonna see each other at school hours when they make their way towards the provisional licensing exam, which will be in a few months. To which Izuku hearing this, not really wanting to spoil the surprise that he actually already has something even better than that, he would just say that he's excited to see her again, and so the two would end up having a pretty nice day, with the next day rolling around where Izuku would go on to find out about the USJ event that's actually in a few days. Izuku would get pretty excited being told that he needs his guardian to take care of that, and then afterwards Aizawa would go on to tell the class that for today though, they're going to be needing to focus on their event, explaining to them that much like their 2v2 battles they just took place in, today the class was going to be participating in a Class 1B versus Class 1B event, being told that normally they usually hold off on these until later, but since Vlad King's been insisting on this and practically pestering Nezu to do this every day, Nezu finally ended up caving into his requests. So the pairings would go as follow, kinda similarly to what takes place in season 6 of My Hero Academia, with Izuku pairing up with Kaminari, Invisible Girl or Toru, and Momo Yaoyorozu, which were all chosen at random, mind you, since I used the little random generator wheel, and I also used it for his opponents, which consists of the Pony Girl who can shoot horns, Sen Kaibara, he has like a weird quirk that allows him to turn his body into like a drill. It's actually kind of cool when you think about it. Reiko Yanagi, I think that's how you pronounce it, she pretty much has like a pretty relatively weak telekinesis quirk. She can move something about as heavy as 150 pounds with her mind. And Kojiro, you know that one dude that looked like a stick of Elmer glue? Yeah, him. He's the opponents that Izuku has to go up against. So once Izuku would see the other class and the introductions would be had, with Monoma probably being like, it's about time we got a chance to face off against each other. Can't wait to crush Class 1A. To which Izuku hearing Monoma, he would think that, yeah, that guy's annoying. But Kendo smacking him in the back of the head, causing him to shut up, would lead him to smile at Kendo, with her smiling right back at Izuku. Anyways though, the test would begin, and seeing as the goal was essentially to capture the other team's contestants, Izuku would start off by doing a little bit of reconnaissance, flying up into the air, and via the communication system that they were given thanks to UA, he would tell them exactly where their opponents are, with Class 1B having actually opted to go for more of a stay together path. So with Izuku recognizing that all of them were all in one spot, Izuku, though he knows his teammates would probably want to get involved, he would think to himself that this might just be a bit more fun. So flying down towards their direction, Izuku would come into their line of sight, with the Pony Girl going, he's there, shooting a bunch of pony little like unicorn horns towards Izuku, which Izuku would stop in their path with a slight gust of wind, him thinking that they're pretty weak. This is when Reiko would go on to use her telekinesis quirk to try to send a bit of rubble flying towards Deku. However, it wouldn't even get close to connecting, with Izuku smirking and Kojiro shooting a max power glue attack at Izuku, trying to cause him to stiffen up, but much like every other far range attack, none of them could land, with Izuku eventually creating this air cage that he would trap all of them inside of, and then levitating all of them as he literally proceeds to fly them towards the direction of the cage where he has to shove them in for them to win. And seeing as none of them are able to break out of literal air, with them literally thinking that this guy's a quirk very similar to one of their classmates who has the ability to literally harden air, they'd be like, dude, this thing is so hard. With Kaibara, the dude with the drill quirk, be like, this thing is made out of steel, what the heck? I can't even pierce it with my quirk. With Class 1B being completely unable to break through, they would eventually be eliminated, with Momo, Kaminari, and Invisible Girl all being visibly saddened by this. We didn't even get to do anything, Momo would say, as Izuku hearing this would feel pretty bad, saying that he's sorry. He guesses he took things a bit too far. But before Izuku could say any more, all of a sudden one of Class B's contestants would say, what? You guys are sad? We got taken out by one of your members, and in record time! The dude defeated us in all of 2 minutes! And Izuku hearing this would have a little bit of a cocky grin on his face, but then realizing that yeah, he's kind of like outperforming his classmates a little bit too much and next time he should probably just hang back, Izuku would look at his classmates saying sorry, that the next time they have a little event, he swears he'll hold back. So this is when the day would finish and everybody else would partake in their own little events, as we would then end up getting the next event to come into the story, which would be the USJ event. And seeing as it only starts to get interesting once Kurogiri arrives, let's just skip to that. Immediately, a purple warp gate would arrive into the USJ, with the students all staring at it, wondering what the heck this is about. But as Kurogiri would begin to speak, it would become increasingly obvious to Izuku that this is a villain. So immediately jumping into the action, Izuku cupping both of his hands together, he would shoot a tornado out of his palms, as it would instantly blow Kurogiri as far as possible from the students, although while Aizawa would lunge downwards to where the villains are at and would begin taking charge, with the Pro Hero 13 saying, everybody out of here! She would attempt to open the doors, but realizing that they were jammed shut and locked, she would use her black hole quirk to create an opening. However, just as that would be formed, Kurogiri would appear at the entrance saying, I'm sorry heroes, but I can't let. However, before he could even finish that sentence, Izuku would start compressing him with air, crushing that metal portion of Kurogiri's body, with Kurogiri screaming, what's happening to me? How is this possible? He's compressing air around me and crushing me slowly. And as Kurogiri would find himself unable to even use his quirk to warp gate out of there, Izuku's hand would be held stretched out, as Izuku, knowing that he needs to help Aizawa because he's starting to literally become overwhelmed by the villains, Izuku would shoot a tornado of wind towards the direction of a massive group of them, knocking a few out with that attack as Izuku would continue crushing Kurogiri with his left hand. It's at this moment that Kurogiri would finally pass out into unconsciousness and the students would all exit the area. At this, the Pro Hero 13 would thank Izuku, saying that he needs to come along with them and that the rest of the heroes will arrive shortly after. However, Izuku wasn't playing those games. He would tell 13 that he's technically a hero, before flying down to where Aizawa is, landing with the most superhero-esque landing ever, shooting a wave of wind that barely dodges Aizawa by a hair, causing his hair to literally start rising up without him even using his quirk. In this moment, he would tell Aizawa to blink already, as he would deactivate his quirk, and in an instant, by the time he would open his eyes, all the villains that were surrounding him would have been taken care of. Izuku, now rising back up to his feet, would stare towards Shigaraki, asking if he's the big bad guy, or if it's that muscle brain over there. In this moment, Shigaraki would stare back at Izuku, as scratching at his neck a little bit, he would think, Master didn't tell me someone this powerful would be attending UA High. Well, I guess Nomu's gonna have to handle that. Nomu, kill the brat. Almost instantaneously at that command, the Nomu would lunge towards the direction of Izuku. However, his wind barrier activating the moment Izuku sensed danger, he would shred the Nomu's hand completely, him having used his advanced shield, considering these aren't friends or allies, but villains trying to kill them. So with the Nomu continuing to attempt to press forward, its arm completely shredding, Shigaraki would watch, screaming, Nomu, pull back! The Nomu would leap backwards as Shigaraki would say, and just what the heck was that, kid? How did you manage to create a wind vortex sharp enough to destroy the Nomu? But Izuku saying nothing and simply staring at his opponents, taking them seriously, he would watch on as the Nomu's arm would instantly regenerate the moment Aizawa would blink. And with Izuku realizing that this thing had regeneration, he would be stunned as he would look towards the direction of Aizawa, telling him to undo the erasure effect and to handle this guy, that he'll personally take care of the Nomu. But Aizawa would answer back, telling him that there's no way in the world he's going to be doing that. And Izuku, knowing that his sensei would probably have said that, would simply smirk, saying that he guesses he did ask for too much, raising his right hand as the Nomu would suddenly start being floated up by a gust of tornado that's lifting him, and with the Nomu completely unable to use its limbs to move around in the air, Izuku would raise it higher and higher, before yelling at Shigaraki to pay attention and sending a wind dragon towards its direction. A gigantic kaiju dragon would appear, barely visible to the human eye, which would tear into the Nomu, tearing it to shreds, and as pieces of the Nomu's body would begin falling to the ground, Izuku, creating a gigantic kaiju version of himself, would clap, literally smashing the Nomu within his hands like a mosquito, little bits of it splattering on it as the remaining little tidbits of it would suddenly be blown away by the wind, with bits and pieces of the Nomu being sprinkled a little here and a little there. At this, Shigaraki would watch on in disbelief, with Izuku smirking at the villain and asking him if he still has any intentions on facing him in a real fight. Shigaraki would take 2 steps back, feeling more fear at Izuku in this moment than he ever had for All Might. He would watch as Izuku's hand would start to get lifted, him about to shoot a flying tornado towards its direction to send the villain into next week. However, before the attack would land, a black sludgy-like thing would cover Kurogiri and Shigaraki, with the two of them then being teleported away instantly, as Izuku would be left there standing, with Aizawa just staring at the young prodigy, thinking that this kid is genuinely going to rise to the highest ranks of heroics. But since he's still his homeroom teacher, he can't let him know that quite yet. He would stare at the boy, telling him that that was utterly reckless and there was no reason he needed to involve himself in that fight. To which Izuku, then staring towards Aizawa, would remind him that he's part of the mini pro hero program, with Aizawa telling him to show him his license then, knowing that the boy still had yet to receive it. And with Izuku looking at Aizawa knowing he knew that, he would go on to tell him that his license was going to be arriving in just a few days. What's the big deal? He just handled the entire villain operation all by himself. Aizawa should be singing his praises right now. However, Aizawa would do just the opposite, with his hair lifting, telling Izuku that as long as he's part of his classroom, he's still under his jurisdiction, and to not forget that. As Izuku would snarl at Aizawa, with his left horn growing a bit longer than usual. Aizawa would question what the heck that was, since his quirk had been cancelled in that moment, so there should have been no way that any aspect of it should have worked, but it did. And unknown to both of them, that would have just been a taste of what was to come for Izuku, because the boy wasn't merely born with one quirk, but 2. So with everything that had just taken place in the USJ, Izuku would pretty much fly home, completely ignoring Aizawa and leaving the area, only to arrive home and receiving an email from Principal Nezu that read urgent. Nezu would then go on to join a little FaceTime call with Izuku, where he would go on to tell him that it was quite unprofessional to treat Aizawa the way that he did. However, he would acknowledge that it was thanks to his efforts that no student was even minorly injured. So he would thank Izuku, going on to tell him to next time act a little bit more respectful towards his staff. He would nod, with Izuku just being like, fine, I guess I'll do that. As we would then shortly after see the call end, to which Izuku would slam his face into a pillow, just screaming into it, going, damn it, what the heck was that? I show off and everyone can see what I do, and instead of getting a mouthful of praises, everybody's telling me that I messed up? What, I'm not allowed to have a temper all of a sudden? But as Izuku would be freaking out, he would suddenly get a phone call from Maya, and picking it up, he would go on to ask what's up, with her saying, whoa, aren't you in a mood today? He would apologize, saying that he's just in a really bad mood because at school, they were attacked by villains, he took them all out, and instead of getting the praises that he deserved, he was pretty much chewed out. Maya, hearing that, would say, whoa, you really took out villains? To which Izuku, looking at Maya through the FaceTime call with an expression of "Are you serious?" would say, "Of course I did, why would I lie about that?" Maya would be so surprised, saying that he really is the best, isn't he? To which Izuku would smile, and after venting some of his frustrations out with her and having a little bit of a chat, eventually Izuku would decide that the best thing to do for the week that they have off would probably be to train. So that's exactly what Izuku would do, training on his own from the moment he would wake up to the moment he would go to sleep. Every single time he was doing anything, eating, using the bathroom, sleeping, showering, Izuku had his wind quirk active in one way, shape, or another. This would allow Izuku to push the limits of his quirk, making it even more powerful than it was before, with Izuku now able to completely annihilate the airspace inside of a domain that he was controlling. So say Izuku pretty much manifested it so that in a specific radius of wind, he like removed all of the oxygen in the area, because you know, wind and well, they're not the same, but I mean, in anime terms, they could be, right? So Izuku's basically able to suck out like the air out of an area by creating like a vortex that just like completely drains it out. Like it doesn't allow you to breathe in anything. So it's kind of like stranding his opponents out in space, which is pretty insane. And Izuku would also develop a brand new move that he's definitely going to be spamming called Cleave. Pretty similar to what Sukuna does, where he weaves his hands in the air and shling like a bunch of slashes appear. He basically developed that after having faced Nomu and realizing that maybe his attacks need to get a bit more deadlier, especially with the fact that now he has a nuclear bomb and a brother. So as the week would finally end and Izuku would return back to class, this is where they would all be informed of the UA Sports Festival. Izuku not being shocked in the slightest, seeing as he knew this was coming up. However, he didn't know that it was still going to be around, considering he would have thought that the school might have cancelled it with what had just happened. So with Izuku's hopes in the festival now being brought back and him having the opportunity to show off in front of millions, this would give Deku the perfect opportunity to show off to his dad and let him know just how strong he truly is. Izuku couldn't wait for the sports festival to begin, so by the time that class would end and they would all be leaving the classroom, the entire pathway would be blocked off by a bunch of random extras who were trying to scout out what Class 1A looked like, seeing as the class was already filled with people who have had their first villain encounters. But with Izuku wanting to make his way through, he would simply use his wind quirk, snapping his fingers as a current of wind would separate them like Moses separated the sea, and then walking right past without acknowledging their existence one bit, he would make his way to the cafeteria. However, before Izuku could make it there, he would hear a voice from the background saying, "It must be nice to have such a gifted quirk. I bet you're just itching for the opportunity to show." However, before he can finish that sentence, his mouth would be closed thanks to the wind force literally dragging it up, not allowing Shinso to even speak, with Izuku saying, "Shut up, extra," as he would walk off, with his classmates behind him being like, "Whoa, does Deku ever acted like that?" But Katsuki being one of the only ones to think, "Guess he's not that bad after all," being the only one to have actually respected what Izuku had just done in that moment, and Todoroki to stand there staring at Izuku's back, wondering just how far the gap between each of them is. And because there's nothing really to cover until we get to the sports festival, let's just skip straight to that, with Deku being the student in this timeline to give the speech thanks to his outstanding performance that he would have had during the festival. It's here that after Izuku would finish giving his speech, President Mike would say, "And that's Izuku Midoriya for ya. He's the student who not only managed to land score-shattering records during the entrance exam, but also became the first ever UA student to enter the mini pro hero system." With people wondering what that is, President Mike would say, "Oh right, you guys aren't aware of that. Well, it pretty much allows Izuku to act as though he was a pro hero without having even finished high school." And with people hearing that, they just go nuts to butts, because everyone's just like, "Dude, how strong is this kid if he can already act as if he was a pro hero?" And they wouldn't have to wait too long to see that, because immediately the first event would kick off with Izuku smirking, knowing that his father and entire family were in the crowd. So cracking his neck, Izuku would ready himself for the instant that President Mike would shout "go." And the moment that this would happen, Izuku would be gone, wind pressure completely shooting this man flying through the air with a swirly tornado surrounding surrounding him as the man would instantly blitz across 3 robots, destroying them and slashing them into little itty bitty pieces as they would fall down to the ground, creating a rubble-like path which Todoroki would cover in ice, making it even more difficult for everybody to pass, as Izuku would simply fly right over that section where they had to like make these weird jumps. And when it came to the minefield, forget about it, Izuku blew right past that thing like it was nothing, getting a grand score of 10 seconds before he was already at the finish line, if not like 4. But anyways, with that performance out of the way, the crowd would go nuts, with Izuku's brother smirking, knowing just how strong he was, and Izuku's father watching on with an unsurprised look on his face. To which Inko, noticing, would tap on her husband, going, "Didn't you see what Izuku just did? He just cleared the entire thing." But Battle Beast simply just looks at her and nods, saying, "Huh, yeah, he did," as he would stare towards Katsuya, rubbing his hair, saying, "I can't wait until I see you out there," with Inko being like, "You better show some more support to Izuku, or like I said earlier, I won't be making you big feasts anymore." So then Battle Beast kind of just looks at her and he's all like, "Whatever," and he starts like fake clapping, you know, acting as though he cares. Izuku, seeing this in the stands, just gets pissed off for the next event, which ends up boding pretty badly for his opponents, because in this timeline, I'm not going to be covering the cavalry battle, since in my opinion, that is like my least favorite event in the entire My Hero story, and instead, I'm going to be replacing it with what, like 6 different battle royales. Essentially, the way that this is going to be working is that each little battle royale will have every contestant, being 10 people, getting into that ring where normally they have the 1v1 battles, and the last 4 to stay standing are pretty much going to be the ones that pass. So you can either make alliances or you can choose to fight everybody on your own, but the proctors would definitely advise making alliances. However, for Izuku's group of people that are with him, who it doesn't really matter who it is because they're all gonna get eliminated, it would bode pretty bad for them. But let's just say that it's a couple of general course duties, 1B, and let's throw Kaminari in there just because why not? So the millisecond that this thing would begin, Izuku's eyes would have like a light green hueish glow to them, as everybody would be sent flying off of the arena, with Izuku just standing there, arms still crossed. Everybody seeing this would be stunned, going, "Dude, how does he have such an overpowered wind quirk? These new generation heroes are just getting stronger and stronger. This is insane." And the crowd's just going nuts. A bunch of posts are going crazy about Izuku on social media. We got the freaking villains literally streaming this as we speak, and they're not watching it legally, mind you, because you know they're villains, they gotta be on villainy timing. And you know, you got All For One smiling in his chair going, "Interesting, I'll get my hands on that quirk." All the while in the back, there's literally a screaming Shigaraki just like basically begging for his life, being turned as we speak into that horrible monster creation thing that All For One and Dr. Ujiko made. Just because, truth be told, if we don't give Shigaraki that power up now, he's gonna get mopped, including One For All. So One For All needs to do that whole mind transference things to that body and up himself, because if he doesn't, he will die when he faces Izuku. But I digress. Anyways, what ends up happening after this is that we would finally get the 1v1 battles, and as Izuku would be sitting in the waiting room simply thinking to himself that he can't wait for this all to begin, to show his father just how many utilities his quirk has in comparison to his own, suddenly Todoroki would walk into the room, challenging Izuku, telling him that he's not simply going to be walking through this whole thing, and that it won't be the breeze he's thinking it will be, that he'll be putting up a fight with only his ice quirk. Izuku, hearing this, however, would simply say that that's not even going to be half enough to beat him, going on to call Todoroki icy hot, as Bakugo would walk into the room, telling Izuku that he's going to make sure he gets knocked down a peg or two. So with Izuku now having both of these challengers in front of him basically doing declarations, Izuku would say, "Bring it on, I can't wait to wipe the floor with both of you." As we then flash forward a little bit, and we would now see Izuku versus Shinso as the first match. With this event starting, we hear President Mike going, "We have Izuku Midoriya, a fan favorite, and Shinso Hitoshi. Who knows how he's gotten this far, but only time will tell if he's a match for Izuku." And the moment that everything would begin, Izuku would simply do this, like, You know how when you do that to blow out your candles, Izuku does that and literally sends Shinso out of the arena, simultaneously causing all the air in the area that he was blowing it to start knocking popcorn, cotton candy, and making people's hair go crazy. It's like a freaking little mist of hurricane just blew by. With the effect of this knocking Shinto into the wall on the other side, leaving him cleanly knocked out before he even had the chance to spout some nonsense about Izuku being so lucky or even trying to get Izuku to speak. So, as Izuku would do this, he would look up towards the stands to see what his father had thought of that. But once again, that nonchalant face would be the expression his father's holding. And with Inko now staring at her husband, she would say, "Come on, get a little excited. Didn't you just see what our son just did with his quirk?" But the man would simply be like, "Yeah, I'll get excited. Hooray, Deku." He says that out loud, and everybody's like, "Whoa, we got Battle Beast in the stands." To which President Mike would say, "And in case most of you guys didn't know, Battle Beast is actually the father of Izuku Midoriya." With everybody hearing that a pro hero, and not only just a pro hero, but a top 20 is his father, they're like, "No freaking wonder his quirk is so strong." With some people being like, "Wait, but his quirk is wind. It has nothing to do." The only thing sort of making them look similar are those horns that his father also has. But with Izuku kind of just sitting there and just, doing like an eye roll after his father had just done a fake cheer for him, he eventually makes his way towards the back of the little area where all the students are at. And once there, Izuku would actually take note that Todoroki was actually having a conversation with his father. Todoroki telling him that he's a deadbeat, or whatever it is that he tells him in the anime, with Izuku turning the corner and seeing Endeavor. With Izuku stopping him in his tracks and telling him, "I don't know if you know this or not, number 2, but giving your son a reason to hate you as much as it seems Todoroki does isn't healthy." To which the flaming pro would tell the boy to shut up, that this is his family matter. However, Izuku using his wind quirk and completely putting out the flames in Endeavor's costume, he would go on to tell him to treat the boy better. Unless, of course, he wants to become a literal stepping stone on his path to become the number 1 hero. And with Endeavor hearing this, he would get pissed, saying, "Why you damn brat, how dare you talk?" But before he could finish that sentence, All Might would turn the corner going, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what's going on over here?" Pretty much just de-escalating the situation, to which Izuku would tell All Might that that guy is a certified jerk. All Might would say that Endeavor may be a lot of things, but a good hero is among them. So he needs to show the pro the proper respect. But Izuku would simply look at All Might, telling him that if somebody wants his respect, they've got to earn it. And so, Izuku would make his way towards the second match, with the contestant that he goes up against in this timeline being the girl with the strange vine quirk. The match would begin with vines instantly being shot towards the direction of Izuku, and her creating a dome around herself with vines, holding herself to the ground so that the wind power that Izuku first attacks her with wouldn't blow her off. This would successfully work, with vines flying towards the direction of Izuku trying to attack him, and Izuku waving his hand in the air, using a cleave-like attack that would just completely destroy the vines. A bunch of those vines would be on the ground, and suddenly Izuku, using his wind power, raises them into the air before he starts to use her own vines as projectiles against her. This would start weakening her defenses until eventually Izuku, being tired of playing this cat and mouse game, would simply raise one hand up into the air. A small little vortex barely visible would start forming as the vine girl would start coughing out, going and very soon it would be clear what Izuku had just done. He had vacuumed the air out of that area that she was standing in, knocking her out almost instantaneously. Because having been caught off guard by that attack, she was pretty much cooked. It's similar to what Star and Stripe had done to Shigaraki when she said, "The air does not exist 100 meters near me," and the dude was like, if he didn't have his regeneration quirk, would have literally died. That's what Izuku had just done to her, which was just preposterous. But anyways, with that match finally being over, his next match would be announced, which would be against Tensei Ida. However, due to his brother having been attacked by Stain, the match never actually plays out, so Izuku gets to just move on to the finals, where Izuku would find himself facing off against Katsuki. And with the proctor hyping up the match a little bit, Midnight being like, "Alright, are you guys excited?" to the crowd, everybody's all hyped up, although while Bakugo would be cracking his knuckles, telling him that he's gonna take him out, just like he did to that icy hot brat, before then staring at Izuku and lunging towards him with an explosion. However, his explosions would literally be taken out instantly. The wind that Izuku creates instantly, if you light a match and then like you blow on it, it just goes away. That's what Izuku's essentially doing to his explosions. He's blowing away the sweat in Bakugo's palms before he gets the chance to ignite it. And even when it does get ignited, the explosion power gets pretty much diluted by the fact that Izuku's wind is just destroying that. Izuku now watching Bakugo sit there trying to activate his quirk, but it literally being like a dud, like it activates every now and then, but it doesn't work. He would just stare at him, asking him what exactly his plan of attack is now, just kind of standing there with a bored expression, as we then see a vein appear in Bakugo's forehead saying, whatever, I guess it's a hand-to-hand match. But the moment he would get up close with Izuku trying to fight him, Izuku would smirk saying, you're a real idiot, you know that? Blocking Bakugo's punch with his elbow, countering his kicks with a leg sweep, and then headbutting him with his horns straight into his skull. Bakugo, after receiving that blow, would fall down to the ground seemingly unconscious for a second before taking advantage of that situation and attempting to get Izuku with the close quarters explosion. However, before the explosion could land on Izuku, his barrier would form, shredding Bakugo's arm, with him dropping it, asking, the hell? Looking back towards Izuku and seeing these red glowing eyes in the midst of this, Bakugo would take 2 steps back, realizing that he is completely outclassed. And then Izuku would end the battle by simply flicking at Bakugo, sending a multitude of wind bullet attacks straight from his finger, which knocked the boy out completely. After this, President Mike would say, I don't believe it. It was a slaughter. Izuku Midoriya has defeated Katsuki Bakugo and the entirety of the UA Sports Festival without taking a nick of damage. He might just be the next symbol of peace. With the crowd going crazy and even Izuku's father staring at this display of power, kind of nodding. That is literally like the only thing that his father does. Izuku, noticing that, wouldn't be able to help but smile, knowing that for the first time, his father finally acknowledged something. However, not allowing himself to feel anything but mostly negative feelings towards his father, he would quickly go back to that nonchalant attitude. He would begin waving his hands in the air, with Izuku hearing screams from the background going, wait, is that? Then suddenly turning to the stadium to see Maya waving her hands like crazy at Izuku, with the people around her being like, girl, chill out, you're literally smacking us. And you know, she's just like freaking out. She's like, Izuku, like that, you know, like how they do in like typical anime stuff. As she then uses her barrier quirk to literally jump into the area, with heroes like, hey, you can't do that, and her like landing right in the midst of everything, with Bakugo literally knocked out on the ground. She would look at him, telling him that he's the best, wrapping her arms around Izuku and hugging the boy, who's smiling at her. And I haven't described what she looks like, but kind of imagine Adam Eve. So she has like a orange hair, kind of like Kendo, but her hair's straight and it's like really long, I guess. Yeah, let's do that. But anyways, yeah, she wraps her arms around Izuku and she's like, you're the best. Like, I can't believe you're that strong. Like, you've gotten so much better, Izuku. As Izuku would be like, you're joking me. And then President Mike would say, unbelievable. Not only has he stolen the hearts of the people, but of a lovely little lady. As you know, the crowd starts being like, aw. And you know, Izuku just gets his medal handed to him. But anyways, I digress. Point is, after this takes place and Izuku would get the first place in the sports festival, he would arrive home for dinner, where much like usual, it's a bit of a quiet table, until eventually Izuku's father finally speaks up, saying, you know, kid, you did kind of well during the sports festival. I won't say I'm proud because you're still not a hero, but you're on your way, kid. And Izuku, hearing that, his eyes would like glimmer, looking at his father, be like, finally. With Katsuya like being like, look, you heard that? You even managed to impress dad. With Izuku's father being like, I'm not impressed, damn it. I just wanted to acknowledge that he's not a total failure. The moment completely being ruined by that outburst, with Izuku saying, well, there's dad. As we would then pretty much just jump cut to the students returning back to class, where they would go on to pick their pro hero names. At this, we would see Izuku in the back of the class thinking, I've never really thought about my hero name. And as he would be thinking about this, contemplating what he should choose, he would watch on as his classmates would go on up there, being told that their hero names are great by midnight. Izuku, deciding that it's about time that he picked his own hero name, would think, alright, what about writing something down on his whiteboard and making its way to the front. Here, Izuku would show everybody what it reads, with Midnight saying, Whirlwind? That's actually an incredible name for you. Yeah, that's awesome. You're sure to rise to the top of the hero ranks with a name like that. as Izuku would smile, saying that he knew it was good. Mind you, this is a 14-year-old coming up with the name with short notice, so if it's not the craziest name in the world, my apologies. But anyways, continuing forth with the story, they would then go on to be told about the internship program. And here's where I have a little bit of a dilemma. Where should Izuku go to normally? Because obviously we could have Izuku going with his father, but I'm not too sure how that would bode. But at the same time, I can't think of any other hero that he could go with, so we're actually going to be going with his father after all. Anyways, Izuku, seeing the name of his father as one of the heroes that had actually put in a request to have him, Izuku thinks, what the hell, he might as well go see what his dad wants. And so, taking the internship, his father would go on to tell him that he's glad he took the opportunity. He can show him how to be a real man finally. And Izuku, hearing that, would say, what the hell, Dad? You mean to tell me you called me over here just to belittle me again? I'm out of here. But his father would say, close that damn door, boy. With Izuku hearing his father's growls and closing the door, the little like door handle literally having been crumpled by Izuku's hands, as he would walk over towards his dad and he would tell him that they're gonna go on a fun mission and he's gonna join whether he likes it or not. So, boarding a plane, the two would make their way towards Hosu City prior to the attack with the Nomus, meaning that not only will there not be chaos going amok, but Ida's involvement in this part in the story hasn't even had the chance to take place. So with Battle Beast and Izuku now on the scene doing a bit of reconnaissance, they would find the hero killer doing his usual tasks, facing off against some random no-name hero, with Battle Beast being the first to track him down due to his keen senses being able to smell blood. And with Izuku arriving just shortly right after, Izuku would watch from the air as Battle Beast would growl, leading Stain to know somebody was coming, leaping up into the air and using his blades to block the attack of Battle Beast. However, him using his Berserk Quirk would punch straight through the blade, snapping both of them in half, with Stain being sent crashing into the wall, ribs shattering and an arm being broken. As we would watch on as Battle Beast howls into the air and says, "You see that?" before suddenly he can't move at all. Stain had licked the blood that would have been left behind from Battle Beast's punch to his blades, and with him licking it and standing back up weakly, telling him that he's among the type of heroes he hates most. And with Izuku recognizing the danger situation, he would annihilate the air vacuum in the area. Stain about to collapse, however, his willpower keeping him standing, and with no oxygen pumping his lungs hard or anything else, he would lunge towards the direction of Battle Beast. Izuku being forced to create a barrier for him, with Battle Beast watching on helplessly as that barrier would have just saved his life. Stain now would fall to the ground completely unconscious, brain dried of oxygen, as we would now have Izuku in the air looking down to his father, asking if that's how a real man takes care of villains. His father would look at him, telling him that he had that handled, with Izuku saying in response, "Are you kidding me, Dad? I just saved your life, I stopped the hero killer, and you're still acting like I'm a nobody. What's your problem with me?" But Battle Beast would tell him to shut up, that he doesn't have time for this. But Izuku would say, "No, make time for this. I'm your son, and I'm done playing these games. Why in the world have you treated Katsuya so much better than me all these years? I don't get it. It's not like I'm jealous of my little brother or anything. I'm just tired of constantly being treated as though I'm not one of your sons." Battle Beast looking at him would tell him that that's not his concern, and Izuku would say that he's going to make it his concern. So unless he wants the oxygen drained from his brain, he suggests he stops talking before he turns him into a freaking vegetable. As we would then see his father growl in a low tone, looking towards Izuku straight in the eyes and telling him that, "I'm stubborn, okay? I'm stubborn. The moment I found out what your quirk was and that it wasn't mine, I threw a hissy fit and treated you as though you were scum, not even my son, only to then find out a few years later that you started training harder than ever, and me belittling you became your motivation. You think that I'm not aware of how hard you train every time the thought of me comes into your mind? Of course I know it, brat. My senses don't lie to me. So since I was too stubborn to apologize for the way that I had treated you, I figured I might as well leave things the way that they were, since after all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it." Izuku hearing this would say, "Are you kidding me? All these years you've been treating me like garbage because what, you wanted to push me in training?" Izuku starts bursting out into a maniacal laughter before telling his dad that he's a freaking idiot. flying off into the distance, leaving his father there to stand there with a just defeated expression. As we would zoom into Izuku flying through the air, simply thinking to himself that that damn stubborn old man had him thinking he hated him his whole life. But that was the real reason? Izuku would feel a couple of tears bawling out of his eyes as he would wipe them off, thinking to himself that his dad was a real idiot. And as Izuku would continue floating through the air, suddenly one person would come to his mind. The one person that always seemed to calm him down whenever anything was going on around him. Maya. Flying towards the direction of her house immediately, Izuku would fly outside of her window hoping that she was there, and just his luck, she was actually getting ready to go on her shift that she had to go on with her family-owned arcade business. As she would be doing so, suddenly wind would start blowing through her room, and she, knowing immediately who this is, she would go to the window to see Izuku flying outside like he would sometimes tend to do. She would say, "What are you doing here, Izuku? I didn't think we were hanging out today. Plus, I've got to go to work." She shows him like the name tag in the outfit, and he's like, "Look, I know you gotta go to work, but I needed to talk to somebody and I had no idea who else to do it with." So Maya, looking at Izuku and even hearing it in his voice that he doesn't have that macho bravado he always throws in there, would just be like, "All right, I'll come outside in a minute." And so the two would be outside on the porch with Izuku sitting on the railing just telling her that he finally found out why his dad was such a jerk to him all this time. Maya would say, "What, really? Spill." With Izuku staring at her and telling her to promise not to laugh. She would say that she promises, and then Izuku would tell her the reason. With the moment that Maya hears this, she would just kind of look at Izuku, stay silent for a second, and then trying to, lift up the spirits of the area around them, she would say, "Well, I mean, it's not like your dad did you a disservice. Him treating you like that all those years did help you out, no?" Kind of shoulder bumping him with her fist, my bad. As Izuku would kind of just stare back at her and say, "Maya, I'm serious. This is annoying. All my life I thought my dad hated me and that I was some big failure, but no, the damn bastard was just too stubborn to apologize for being such a jerk when I was young." Maya hearing that would sigh, saying that she knows, but she doesn't exactly do too well with confrontation or even talking about things. She would look at Izuku telling him that, if he wants, they could just try getting their minds off of these things since she's not exactly the best talker. And so Izuku looking at her and asking what she has in mind. If it's another trip to the arcade, he's not exactly in the mood, but she's like, "Nah, I don't really feel like going today. Plus, I didn't really feel like working either. I'll just tell my brother that I'm busy or something." So, changing out of her little arcade clothes, she would open the door to Izuku going, "Come on, nobody's home right now." With Izuku being like, "What? You want to just hang out here? But we haven't done that before." With Maya being like, "What, goody goody, you don't like to break a few rules?" And so the two of them going in the house would then proceed to turn on that big old flat screen that Maya has in her living room as she goes over to the fridge getting her special secret ice cream tub that she had been saving for, just a great occasion. As she then looks at Izuku asking how he feels about this flavor. She then takes out 2 spoons and the two of them proceed to cram out on the whole entire tub of ice cream while they would watch, I don't know, my brand new video, What If Deku Had a Golden Touch Quirk, which by the way is one of the best videos I've ever done. Go check that out. Selfless plug aside, they just watched some random movie, right? And with that being the case, after this, Izuku almost kind of forgets what the heck he had been going through. She pulls out a couple of board games, and with the two having a blast and fun, laughing and just teasing each other, eventually Izuku turning to Maya would just look at her and for the first time see her in a different light. The two kind of just stare at each other for a second, with Maya growing bright red and asking Izuku if she has something on her face. But Izuku just kind of like runs his hands through her hair and says that that's not it. As the two of them then start kissing and the door flies wide open, with Maya's big brother opening it and going, "Maya, get your But then seeing Izuku and Maya literally in the middle of kissing, he would say, "Ah, come on, did I really have to walk in on that? Maya, get your stuff. Izuku, just go home. We'll talk about this later." With Izuku grabbing his stuff and kind of just like looking down, avoiding his eyes, with the big brother that obviously could not do a thing to Izuku, intimidating him, not necessarily because he's stronger, but that's Maya's big brother. And he always was cool with him. So as Izuku would leave, the brother would say, "Wait, Izuku, I overreacted. Honestly, dude, if Maya's gonna be going out with anybody, I'd rather it be you than someone else." with Izuku turning towards him and saying thanks, but then his brother would grab him by the shoulders, telling Izuku that still, that doesn't mean he likes seeing his little sister with the boy in the house alone. Izuku hearing that was like, what? But we weren't even, as he would say, you don't gotta explain it to me, dude. I know. Just don't let it happen again, Deku. As Izuku would look towards him, nod, and then leave, and Maya then proceeds to text him later saying that she got a huge scolding, and thanks for that. Izuku thanks her for everything with a big old paragraph text explaining everything and how he's sorry he might have made the friendship weird by kissing her, but then they have some heart-to-heart conversation through message, and eventually Izuku and Maya end up unofficially dating. Which means that for the foreseeable future, Izuku's love interest for this story is going to be the random OC that I threw in, because why not? Honestly, I forgot why I even did that. But anyways, going back to the main point of the story, with Izuku and the rest of the class arriving back at UA, they would all pretty much be asked what it is that they learned with a little bit of an event race. You guys remember it in the anime? It's kind of like one of the most forgettable scenes, but yeah, that happens. And with that taking place, Aizawa would pretty much end the class off by telling them all to get ready because their final exams are going to be coming up in a week, which means that for the foreseeable future, Izuku was not really going to be focusing as much on his quirk, but on his studies, because if Izuku's being honest, that's kind of the area he's been neglecting for a while. So Izuku hitting up Maya would proceed to do a whole lot of studying before the 1 week would be over, and he would finally be ready to take the exams, with Izuku passing and eventually facing off against the teacher who he was gonna be having to go up against, which in this timeline I think would actually benefit Izuku if he was to actually face off against Aizawa, since in this timeline, even though Bakugo and Izuku aren't necessarily cool, they don't have that horrible relationship that they had in canon at this point in the story, which means that Izuku's battle was actually going to be a bit of a tricky one, since his teammate was going to be another character who heavily relied on his quirk in Todoroki. That said, as the battle would take place, Izuku and Todoroki would both look at each other, nodding as each of them would decide that their goal is probably going to be to escape the place, seeing as Aizawa is most likely the worst matchup they could ever go up against, with them making their way towards the exit, noticing that Aizawa was, well, nowhere in sight. It's here, however, that out of nowhere, Aizawa using a telephone pole would swing in, kicking Todoroki straight into a building, seemingly knocking the boy out as he would turn his gaze towards Izuku, asking the boy exactly how he planned to get out of this situation. And with Izuku staring at his teammate in Todoroki and realizing that he had zero access to his quirk, Izuku decided that maybe he should just fight the guy. So, rushing in using the limited martial arts that Izuku did know, he would try his best at hand-to-hand combat, and though Izuku would keep up at first, stunning Aizawa who didn't think he had that in him, he would then be overwhelmed, seeing as Aizawa has been doing this for a lot longer than him. And as Izuku would be about to be captured by his scarf, out of nowhere, flames would shoot towards the direction of Aizawa, with him being stunned that Todoroki had gotten up that fast, and more importantly, had used his flame quirk. This creates just enough of a gap for Izuku to run away, him turning the corner and making his way into a random building. From there, Aizawa having no idea where Deku was located at, he would go on to capture Todoroki in his scarf, looking around and simply calling out for Izuku, telling him that that's no way to really pass this test. Running away, that doesn't exactly suit his style. So Izuku, recognizing that he is right about that, would suddenly cause a storm. Not a storm, more like a hurricane type thing, right? Minus the water, with the wind starting to blow Aizawa back into a building and start to actively crush the hero. It's at this point that Aizawa would attempt to use his quirk erasure to look around everywhere, as he would spot Izuku in one of the upper windows using his quirk, manipulating the air currents, as Aizawa, staring at just the fringe of his hair that was barely popping out, would cancel his quirk, with Aizawa being given just enough time to regain his composure and attempt to seek Izuku out once more. This, however, would prove very difficult, because with Izuku escaping Aizawa's line of sight, his wind quirk usage would be back up, and since Aizawa had no way of recognizing where Izuku was at once again, he would simply find himself trapped in a tornado that pretty much tore him to shreds. So with the sensei now having been defeated, Todoroki and Izuku would both pass. giving Izuku arguably one of his most difficult fights in the entire series. That said, after this would take place, we would then get the training camp arc, which in the original, remember, the villains attacked and that led to the Camino Ward incident, which then led to the All Might versus One for All stuff. But because that actually won't be happening this time around, seeing as Shigaraki is currently undergoing the procedure to make him like final boss Shigaraki form earlier than in the original, we have none of that taking place, with months on end passing and everything kind of being pretty positive, meaning that we instantly just get to skip to the provisional hero exam arc, where the students would be given their licenses, and we would zoom into Izuku sitting at the back of the bus looking out the window. It's at this moment that he would see the school of Shiketsu High get off their bus, and with Izuku making his way outside with the rest of his class, suddenly a boy from a different school would walk over towards them going, "Whoa, you guys are UA, and you're the boy with the wind quirk. You're incredible." Like, he's all over there acting all fake and stuff, and Izuku, he can see right through that, being like, "Let me go, dude, I don't got time for you," as he simply walks on by and makes his way towards the direction of Maya, where once there, he would start to say hi to her before then somebody else would cut him off, being Inasa, who, slamming his head into the ground, would say that Izuku is incredible and he can't wait to match up against him during these exams, that he's going to be looking forward to that. So as Izuku would stare at Inasa, he would whisper into Maya's ear going, "He is a weirdo," as Maya would start chuckling under her breath, telling Izuku good luck with him doing the same. It's at this point that all the students would get briefed on things, although while Izuku would be in the pro hero office with Gang Orca, because in this specific timeline, due to Izuku already having a literal pro hero license, he doesn't need to participate in this and instead has actually asked to be a proctor alongside Gang Orca, promising not to take things too far on the students, seeing as some of them are his friends. Gang Orca and the rest of the people would be a bit apprehensive to this, but Izuku would promise not to show any favoritism. Not to UA, not to his girlfriend, not to anyone. So as the test would begin and the students would make their way through that ball throwing section where they have to eliminate their targets, eventually they would make their way towards the second portion, consisting of saving people. And once they start doing that, about 5 minutes into it, the two villains would be revealed. Inasa being extremely excited to face off against Izuku one-on-one, with Maya being completely thrown off guard, having not had any clue that Izuku wasn't going to be participating as a contestant because he was participating as a teacher? What? So, as she would watch on as Inasa would fly towards Izuku at crazy speeds, he would land saying, "Fight me!" as the boy would shoot a gust of wind towards Izuku, with him completely dismantling it in an instant before it could even form against him. Inasa would be stunned, saying, "You truly are incredible, show me more." But before Inasa could even finish that thought, there would already be 6 different tornadoes hitting him from multiple angles, causing Inasa to have to try to dodge all of them, unable to do them all. And so we would find our second favorite wind quirk user on the ground, practically defeated, though Inasa would refuse to give up, as he stands back up, telling Izuku that that's not all he can do. But with Izuku looking at the boy wanting to see what his strongest attack truly is, he would wait, Inasa charging up all the air around him as he begins to launch this full power attack. However, before it actually has the chance to hit Izuku, whipping out his wind barrier would stop the attack, before then creating a wind scythe and sending a slash attack towards Inasa, completely ripping his hero costume to shreds and leaving the boy to sit there very, very embarrassed. Shortly after this, Izuku would knock Inasa out by removing all the wind in his facility, making the boy practically quirkless and causing the flow of oxygen to stop to his brain, which knocks the boy completely out, with Maya watching on, being shocked by the genuine difference that there exists between Inasa, who she already thought was impressive, and Izuku. So with Izuku's aura farming now finally over, he would go on to attack Maya, making sure that King Orca wasn't the one to do it because he really wouldn't have shown mercy, as the pro heroes would then, not pro heroes, but the students in training would arrive, and they eventually, do semi well enough that a handful of students end up passing, including all of the original people who passed, with the only failings from Class 1A being Bakugo, since in this timeline, Todoroki and Inasa wouldn't get in each other's ways. That said, with the licensing arc now finally being over, we're now able to jump into the overhaul arc, starting everything off with the introduction of the big three, which is kind of a big deal normally, since obviously we know he ends up going with Mirio. But since his dad is a pro hero and things have been a bit awkward with him, there's no way that I'm not gonna have Izuku going with his dad. So the introduction of Mirio goes relatively the same, with him picking a fight with the entirety of Class 1A, only to realize how big it was as a mistake when he actually has to face off against Deku. Because after destroying all of the classmates, including Todoroki mind you, he would then rush towards the direction of Izuku, as we would watch Izuku looking around wondering just where Mirio would pop out from, since at the moment he would be floating up in the sky. So with Mirio bursting out of the ground with incredible speeds, lunging towards Izuku in an attempt to gouge his eyes, Izuku would go on to form a wind barrier around him, which Mirio would be able to phase right through, recognizing the danger of, so going back into the ground to now once again take advantage of his intangibility. The next time Mirio would have to come out for air, Izuku would have covered the entire area in razor sharp gusts of wind, meaning that by the time that Izuku popped back out, Mirio, he started to get literally shredded by wind, with Mirio instantly recognizing that he can't even plop out of the ground in that area. So the boy decides that he's gonna try to do the only thing that he can, plop out of the ground as fast as possible and try to land a KO blow on Izuku. However, the boy, having expected this, would tank the blow, before then creating a vortex that would suck Mirio to it the second he plops out. So with Mirio being completely unable to deal any damage to the boy, he would pretty much announce that he gives up. Yeah, the boy's impressive. There's no way he was going to be winning that fight. And so with that taking place, he would go on to formally invite Izuku to the Night Eye Agency, but with Izuku saying that he has some daddy issues he needs to resolve, he would respectfully decline Mirio's offer, with us probably still seeing Mirio bumping into Eri, but even if he doesn't, the raid on the Chai Hisaikai area was still going to happen regardless, meaning that regardless of whether Izuku goes to the Night Eye Agency, he would most likely still have found himself going up to that raid. So this would give Izuku and his dad ample time to kind of just talk things through, with his dad still being a lot of a hard ass and not giving Izuku any leeway. Izuku, however, would do his best to kind of like rekindle that relationship, and we kind of see like a Todoroki Endeavor kind of relationship thing starting to happen between Izuku and his father, with Izuku eventually being told of the raid that they're going to be participating in, becoming extremely excited at the opportunity of his first full-on villain raid. So as soon as it would begin, Izuku would burst through in there with his wind quirk active, knocking out villains as soon as he would see them using his cleave attack, wasting absolutely no time and being a little too vicious with the villains, signature thing that runs in the family courtesy of his father. Izuku would eventually make his way towards the direction of 3 villains in particular, with strange abilities, one who can turn his body to diamond, one who can pull things toward him, and another who can eat things, I believe it was. I don't know. But anyways, with Izuku seeing them all, he would proceed to shoot a wind dragon towards their direction, which in turn causes a kaiju-like dragon of wind to bite into them, causing a heavy amount of pain and knocking them out way faster than Sun Eater would have done so in the original. And since Izuku was blowing through this area, simply just destroying the house to carve his way to the main villain, he would clear up the path for the rest of the villains, meaning that Aizawa, Night Eye, and even Mirio would all be advancing faster than usual, leading to a final confrontation between all of the villains and the heroes. And since in this timeline, we're not only seeing Mirio face off against Overhaul, who mind you, almost defeated the villain by himself, but since he also now has the added help of Aizawa, who can erase the dude's quirk, and Izuku, who can completely defend the possibility of anti-quirk bullets, this means that Overhaul's defeat is swift and safe for all parties involved that isn't Overhaul. So with Eri being saved and Izuku using his wind quirk to cause the little girl to fly, she would be so unbelievably happy, as she would watch on as all these heroes had just risked their lives to save her, which actually, now that I remember, would even include All Might, since because he doesn't have to go through with that fight against All for One means that he's still able to participate in hero work. So All Might would actually probably be the one to comfort the little girl, ultimately giving her like a little All Might Might hoodie, which Eri would wear being super cute, and then we would kind of just end the arc off with everything kind of just being positive. So with that said, we're now left with only one final villain in the story, which is All For One, who is merely weeks away from reaching perfection, which, in case you guys didn't know, the original operation for Shigaraki, I believe, was for that All For One could pretty much just transfer bodies with him and be given like a new, state. So Shigaraki was kind of getting destroyed from the inside out. But yeah, All For One now had the body of Shigaraki fully under his control, with 100% of like the compatibility matching this timeline, meaning that he was going to be busted beyond all recognition. So with that being the case, All For One would plot to attack the students on a day when the entire world would be watching, not only destroying the symbol of peace and national television, which is obviously one of his first goals, but also defeating and stealing that overpowered wind quirk of that boy, Izuku Midoriya. So as the time of the UA Sports Festival would approach and the students would be preparing themselves for their performance, all the while Izuku would be facing off against Gentle Criminal, All For One and his forces would plan the biggest attack that the world has ever seen, appearing right dab in the middle of their performance as All For One and countless Nomus, including the members of the League of Villains, would all arrive, beginning to cause havoc, twice his clones flooding the area. As All For One would make contact with the ground. The moment he would do this, the entire area would start to decay, as Izuku would watch on as bystanders and heroes and even classmates alike would start to die, and Izuku, being the only one that could stop this from fully happening, would proceed to use his wind quirk to lift everybody in the area up. This would cause a lot of stamina to drain out of Izuku, considering the fact that at the moment he wasn't lifting 20, 30, no, he was literally lifting like 600 people all simultaneously, all the while using his wind quirk to try to keep All For One away. As this would happen, in the air, All Might would yell out, "All For One! How are you still alive?" As All For One would begin laughing, telling Toshinori that his time as the symbol of peace was finally going to come to an end, as the villain would begin charging up a massive attack, shattering through Izuku's defenses, leading Izuku to watch on as Nomus would begin attacking people, him realizing that he won't be able to efficiently fight, all the while holding all these people up into the air, would recognize that there's one villain that he needs to fight, and everybody else is just going to have to survive. He would put everybody down, all the while simultaneously holding one hand out to create such pressurized wind that would shoot All For One into the air, leading to a confrontation between Izuku and the greatest villain the world has ever seen. Izuku would ask just why he intended to attack on this day, as All For One would tell him what better day to bring devastation and utter hopelessness than on the exact day the heroes had planned to do the opposite. All For One would say that that is the mark of a villain, as Izuku would tell him that he is scum, shooting an attack towards the direction of All For One that Izuku intended to destroy him with in one fell swoop. However, as his cleave attack would land and All For One would literally be cut into thirds, the man would chuckle. As displaying Dragon Ball Z levels of healing, the dude would be back in one place instantaneously. Izuku, watching this on shocked, would realize that the villain in this moment was using a regeneration quirk very similar to the one that the Nomu had used. So Izuku, asking how All For One is still alive, All For One would tell him that he has multiple healing quirks, and if he wants to destroy him, he's going to have to destroy every last atom. But seeing as All For One wasn't going to let that happen, he would shoot a counterattack at Izuku, which he would block with his air barrier, blocking the attacks. All For One, being extremely impressed that only one quirk was capable of keeping up with his hundreds, would ask Izuku to join him, that in his new society, in his new world, he would be among one of the strongest, his right-hand man, uncontested by anyone. However, before Izuku would even get the chance to respond, Katsuya, who was in the stands hearing all of this and watching his brother fight, ignoring the Nomu that he was fighting in that moment, would transform into his 100% output that he could manage, which is in reality 70%, as lunging into the air, he would scream out, "His answer's no!" As All For One would have a hole punch straight through his stomach, which would start healing with Izuku's brother arm still stuck inside him. Izuku, recognizing that that with his brother now being right next to All For One and being about to be decayed, would watch on as All For One would slowly lift his hand towards his direction, about to do just that. However, Izuku saving his little brother at the last moment by using his wind quirk to repel All For One's arms away, unable to move them, and simultaneously drag his brother out of there. He would float his brother, telling him to not be an idiot and to get lost. But Katsuya would say that there's no way that he's gonna leave, that this is his fight. As the successor of One For All, he has to beat this guy. So with him and his brother both smiling, they would face All For One, with one more person arriving in All Might, with him yelling out, "I am here!" throwing a full power punch at All For One, which All For One would catch with one hand, throwing All Might aside and telling him that his death won't be as swift as a simple decay, that he wants him to watch as his successor is ripped limb from limb and all hope for the society is lost. Izuku, hearing that All For One had literally just threatened to kill his brother, his rage would start to go through the roof, both of his horns now starting to elongate, as his eyes would now start to develop a strange hue. It's in this moment that Izuku would shoot more wind-powered attacks at All For One, although while simultaneously his brother and All Might would land haymakers, that All For One would slightly start to get pushed back. However, the reaction from the leader of the villains would be nothing but cackles, saying that try as they might, they will never be able to defeat him. His regeneration is unlike anything that they have ever seen. They could blow up every part of his body, but if a single clump of cells survives, he won't die. And Izuku, saying that he knew that, would proceed to start blocking out the air in the area that All For One was in. All For One telling him that his body no longer needs oxygen, as he would use the Quirk Airwalk to jump straight towards Izuku's direction, hands stretched out in an attempt to decay him. Izuku, seeing this, would use the wind pressure to change the direction of it to blow back against All For One. However, the speed that he was coming at him towards ended up canceling Izuku's wind effects, with him being shocked, saying that that's like the strength of a level 10 hurricane pushing against him, but he's moving through it like there was no gravity at all. And as All For One would get closer and closer to Izuku, suddenly the growls of an unmistakable hero would arrive, standing in front of Izuku, as All For One's hand would make full contact with his face, and as Battle Beast would drive his nails into the man's arms, stabbing into him as hard as he can, barely causing but minimal scratches, Izuku would watch on as his father would be completely disintegrated in front of him, and All For One would only laugh. Izuku, seeing this, would be the final straw, with his horns beginning to protrude out from him even more wild than before, fangs growing, claws becoming sharp, and fur growing out of his body, making him an unmistakable clone of his own father, however with white fur instead of the brown one that his dad has, as Izuku, now staring at All For One, completely motionless, would grab at the face of All For One, smashing his skull with his fist, as a wind current would be pushing against All For One, completely negating the usage of his arms, with tendrils attempting to fly out from his body and hit Izuku, and even a mouth being shot at Izuku's hand point blank. However, his grip would only get tighter and tighter, with Izuku creating multiple constructs that are made out of wind and slamming All For One into them. Suddenly, a gigantic kaiju form of his monster beast form would clasp on All For One, smushing the cells together, with Izuku then creating wind dragons attacking him from the top and bottom, clamping down on the man as a tornado would start bursting through, so unbelievably powerful that a storm would start to create in the center of it, and all of the people nearby at the bottom would start to literally like be whirled in, like it cloudy with a chance of meatballs. Like, it's actually insane, the stuff that Izuku is pulling off right now. And with all this happening, Izuku would then start to slash at the air once, twice, 3, 4, 400, 500 times, slashing at every single clump of cell, with it all being eradicated and All For One being destroyed. This man practically pulling a freaking malevolent shrine attack on the big bad villain of the series, with Izuku's eyes returning back to normal, as he could see that the villain was now fully gone, and there was no coming back for him. No Quirk, was going to be saving him from that vicious onslaught. And with Izuku once again recognizing what had just happened, that his dad had died in order to protect him, who should have been the one that was hit by the attack, Izuku would start having tears come down from his eyes as his brother rushing towards him would cry, both of them holding each other in a bit of an embrace, as All Might, Izuku and Katsuya would slowly float to the ground courtesy of Izuku. This is when Izuku, wiping some tears from his face, would say that they have no time to waste, and All Might, Katsuya and Izuku would help out with the efforts of defeating the remainder Nomus, Dabi being taken care of by Endeavor and Todoroki, all the while Toga would once again be defeated by Uraraka, who this time doesn't need Soga to save her in this timeline, meaning that the ending of the story would be a bit of a sad and good one at the same time. Because keep in mind, this whole thing was televised in Japan, and there was hundreds of casualties, including pro heroes, mind you, and the entirety of the UA school. So once cleanup would finally be over and police reports would be filed, with Izuku being credited as the one who fully defeated the main villain all for one, Izuku would actually go on to leave UA Academy and become the #1 hero, with the final scene of the story being Izuku visiting the gravestone of his father and saying, "I did it, you old man. I did what I always said I would. I became #1. I helped Katsuya grow up and become the greatest hero that he could be, and I'm taking care of Mom. Everything's handled, so you can rest easy, Dad. I love you."
Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever!